could drive through Brookfield and not even slow down. Just a stretch of quiet land where the horizon runs flat and wide, unbroken, except by a church steeple and a grain silo. A place so still, it almost tricks you into believing nothing bad could ever happen here. As if time itself had stopped not out of trauma, but out of she. Back in 1984, the town had just under 2,000 people. One gas station, 2 bars, a tiny post office where the clerks still weighed each letter by hand. There was a hardware store run by a retired Marine with missing fingers and a corner diner. The Whitakers had moved here in the summer of 1977. Not for any grand reason. Alan had been offered a job teaching science at the high school, and they wanted somewhere quieter to raise a family. Somewhere the kids could ride bikes, chase fireflies, and grow. They bought the house on the hill, a white 2-story with green shutters built in the 1940s. It needed work, but Alan liked that. He was the kind of man who believed in repairs over replacements. Marie painted the kitchen yellow. Jenna was 7 when they moved in. Caleb was just 2. Over the years, the house became theirs, not in the way a deed makes something yours, but in the way memory does. The by 84. Jenna was 14 and quieter than most girls her age. She loved to draw, mostly patterns, spirals, sometimes animals, but always with an intensity that made people pause. Her art teacher once said she had a gift for space, though no one Caleb 9 was all noise and knees, always asking questions, obsessed with space shuttles, snakes, and how light bulbs worked. He followed Alan around the house like a shadow. Marie had started a small baking business that spring. She made pies and muffins and cookies so good the town paper had done a short feature on her. Everyone loved Marie. She had a way of making you feel safe, even if you didn't know you needed it. Alan, for his part, was a man of quiet habits. He kept a telescope on the back porch and spent long nights staring at the stars. He said it helped him think. Sometimes Jenna would sit with him, sketchpad in hand. Marie said she didn't understand it, but she never minded. They were normal, happy even. But people don't just vanish from normal. Let's say it started with a noise. A faint hum. That's what Jenna wrote in her journal sometime in May. It's like a tone, but not from a machine. Not even from outside, like in the air, but only when it gets really still. Marie dismissed it, chalked it up to stress or hormones. Alan said it was probably power lines, but Caleb heard it too. It makes my chest feel heavy, he told Marie one night, like when I hold my breath underwater. By early June, Marie had started locking the doors at night, not because anything had happened, but because she felt watched. She didn't say it aloud, not to the kids. But Alan could tell. It was little things. The porch light flickering, the dog across the street growling at empty fields, Jenna starting to wake up with nosebleeds and refusing to talk about her dreams. And then there were the drawings. They changed, from nature scenes and animals to something else. One was a perfect circle surrounded by jagged triangles. Another showed a door that opened into darkness, but inside the darkness were eyes. Eyes drawn over and over, sometimes in different colors, sometimes scratched out. Alan asked her what they meant. She just shrugged. "They're not from me," she said. "I just draw them." June 17th, 1984. It was a Sunday. Marie baked 2 loaves of banana bread and dropped one off for their neighbor, a widowed woman named Mrs. Grady. Jenna stayed in her room most of the afternoon. Alan mowed the lawn. Caleb built a radio out of scrap wood and tinfoil and insisted he could hear voices through it. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Except for one thing, Alan made a phone call. At 5:42 p.m., he dialed the sheriff's office from the kitchen landline. The call lasted 83 seconds. The deputy on duty at the time, a man named Lou Renner, later testified he didn't remember much. It was just odd, he said. He wasn't reporting a crime. He just asked me this question like, do you believe people can be watched without being seen? And then he thanked me and hung up. That was it. No panic, no distress, just a question. The next morning, the Grady woman noticed the mail was still in the Whitakers' box. By noon, no one had seen them. By 6 p.m., the sheriff was called. He entered the house with 2 deputies at 7:04 p.m. What they found made no sense. Dinner plates were still on the table, half-eaten, milk glasses untouched. A chair was tipped over in the hallway. Jenna's sketch pad was open on the couch. The living room fan was spinning, but no one, not a single person, was inside. No signs of struggle, no signs of departure, no note, no bags, no packed clothes. Their car was still in the driveway. Marie's wedding ring still in the dish by the sink. And upstairs in Jenna's room on the last page of her sketch pad was a drawing. It was a spiral not neat, but jagged with a small dark figure at the center. Scrawled across the bottom in uneven letters, he stands behind the mirror. Sheriff Bill Harland had been on the force nearly 25 years by the summer of 1984. He'd handled drunk disputes, barn fires, stolen tractors, and the occasional runaway teen. But nothing in his career, nothing in any manual or training course had prepared him for what he found inside. It wasn't the lack of punto, everything, a pitcher of lemonade still sweating on the counter. One of Caleb's socks on the stairs like he'd stopped mid-run. Jenna's sketch pad open to that spiraled, frantic drawing. The silence wasn't just absence. It was like the air had flattened, as if sound itself had been sucked out of the walls. Harland remembered walking through the house slowly, hand resting on his belt, calling each of their names softly. Alan, Marie, anyone, home, nothing. He stepped into the hallway where the tipped-over chair lay on its side. No scuff marks, no damage. As if someone had stood up too quickly or left in a hurry, but the rest of the room said otherwise. The beds upstairs were made. No signs of packing. Marie's reading glasses rested on the nightstand. Her robe folded neatly at the foot of the bed. In Caleb's room, toy cars were lined up with eerie precision on the windowsill. It wasn't abandonment. It was interruption. The deputies secured the scene by 7:45 p.m. Within 2 hours, the house was crawling with law enforcement, or at least as much as a town like Brookfield could muster. The media hadn't arrived yet, just quiet voices and the shuffle of boots on old floorboards. By midnight, every inch of the property had been searched. The attic. The basement, though, at that point, the door to it had not yet been opened. The tools shed out back. The field behind the house where Jenna once sketched foxes in the tall grass. Nothing. No footprints, no tire marks, no blood, no broken glass, no signs of struggle, and no sign of the Whitakers. The neighbors gathered at the end of the driveway, faces long and pale in the porch-light glow. No one had seen anything. Mrs. Grady said she'd waved to Marie the day before. Mr. Luttrell across the road had spotted Alan mowing the lawn around 4. No one saw or heard a thing out of the ordinary, except one boy. 12-year-old Trevor Milligan, who lived 2 properties down, told the sheriff that sometime around 2 a.m. he'd been up playing with his shortwave radio. He swore he'd seen headlights coming up the Whitaker driveway, but they'd turned off before reaching the house. I thought maybe Mr. Whitaker was coming home from somewhere, he said. Did you see anyone get out? Harland asked him. No, sir, the boy replied. But I thought I saw someone standing by the porch. Just for a second. Real still. Then the light upstairs flicked on and off. Did you tell your parents? I didn't think it was weird till now. By morning, The press had arrived. QLC radio ran a segment by noon, local family missing from their home. No clues yet community. Shaken reporters from Helena and Billings followed. Flashbulbs popped against windows. Microphones were pushed into the sheriff's face. But Harland had nothing to offer. No note, no message, no trace. For the next 2 days, volunteers combed the fields. Boats were sent into the river 20 miles west, though no one had reason to believe the family had gone near it. Roadblocks were set up. Flyers printed. Friends and relatives questioned. But by day 5, the tone shifted. From concern to unease. Because it wasn't just that they were missing. It was how completely they were gone. That same week, a local librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Carol Breen, brought something to the sheriff's office. A checkout slip. Marie had borrowed 3 books 2 weeks earlier. Wilderness Survival Techniques of the Untrained. The Stargazer's Atlas. Folklore and Hidden Lands of the American West. Harland stared at the titles. What would Marie want with these, he asked. Carol shrugged. She seemed normal, maybe just curious. But then she hesitated. She also asked about something. Strange. What do you mean? She asked if we had anything on liminal places. Said she read the term in a magazine. Harland had never heard the word. Carol explained it's like in-between spaces. Not here, not there. Abandoned train stations, empty hallways. Places that feel wrong but aren't technically dangerous. Harland didn't like that. Not because he believed in that kind of thing, but because Marie Whitaker, grounded, cheerful Marie, wouldn't have asked about it unless she felt it. Not by the end of the first week, state police took over. Agents came in with suits, cameras, and clipboards. They examined the house, re-interviewed neighbors, took DNA samples. They even brought dogs. The dogs wouldn't go upstairs. All 3 German shepherds stopped at the bottom of the staircase and began whining. One sat down and refused to move. A trainer tried to drag her up the steps, but the dog yelped and tore free. That wasn't in the report. But one of the deputies mentioned it years later in a taped interview. His voice was flat. It wasn't like they were scared of a smell, he said. It was like they were scared of something watching. Jenna's journals were collected and reviewed. The final entries had a strange rhythm to them. June 1st, I saw him again today. By the fence line, just standing. The birds didn't move while he was there. June 6th. Mom said I've been sleepwalking again. I don't remember it. But my feet were dirty. I had drawn on my arms in pen. I don't remember that either. June 12th. He was in the hallway mirror this time. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear. The mirror was dark and he looked like he was smiling. But only in the reflection. June 15th. I'm not sure we're in the right place anymore. Like physically. But also not. Like we're almost somewhere else and we're just waiting for the rest to catch up. June 17th. This entry was smeared as if wiped with a wet cloth. June 17th. He's in the wall. I think Dad knows. Mom said she hears music when it's quiet enough. But it's not music, it's a vibration. A low sound. Caleb heard it too. He said it makes his teeth hurt. The journals were kept in evidence for years, boxed and labeled alongside old Polaroids and fingerprint dusting kits. But what struck one detective, even back in 1984, and what would haunt him in the years that followed, was not just what Jenna had written. It was how far ahead of something she seemed to be. Not disturbed, not delusional, not dreaming, but documenting. As if whatever was happening in that house hadn't simply crept in through a door left unlocked, but had been growing layer by layer for months, maybe longer. June 19th, 1984, day 9 of the investigation. That morning, Deputy Rick Saunders, a younger officer with a quiet streak and a habit of staying late, noticed something odd in the blueprints of the Whitaker home. They'd been pulled from the county archive, a copy stored in the local planning office. One section of the floor plan an unfinished basement storage room didn't match the layout of the home above. According to the drawing, it was supposed to extend under both the kitchen and living room. But the physical basement ended short like a wall had been added later. Except there was no wall and no door. Just concrete. It was as if a portion of the house had been sealed off entirely. Sheriff Harland returned with 2 officers and a contractor. They removed an old set of shelving units in the basement that had been bolted to the wall for decades. Behind it, faint, nearly invisible, was the outline of a door, sealed with drywall painted over, hidden behind layers of deliberate neglect. They pried it open at 6:47 p.m. The room beyond was pitch black. No windows, no lights. The flashlight beams danced over bare concrete walls. And then, in the far corner, they caught something etched into the floor. A spiral, about 4 feet wide, carved deep into the concrete. The lines were jagged, uneven, almost feverish, like it had been cut quickly or by someone trembling. Around the spiral, dozens of small handprints, not painted, not bloody, just pressed into a thin layer of fine white powder that dusted the floor, like ash. CASA sample was taken. The powder, according to early analysis, was composed mostly of crushed limestone and silica. But when the second lab examined it weeks later out of state, they found something else: traces of human calcium and keratin, hair, bone, teeth. It wasn't just stone. It was remains. The room was sealed that night. A decision was made unofficially to keep the finding internal. No mention in the press, no official documentation. The agents were instructed to pursue more reasonable leads. They interviewed a traveling preacher who had once visited the Whitakers and spoken about the veil between places. They brought in a psychologist to assess the journals and declared them creative expression. By July, the story had slipped from the front page. By August, public pressure was waning. Without bodies, there could be no crime scene. Without evidence of abduction, there could be no charges. Without reason, there could be no closure. But for Sheriff Harland, closure never came. He began spending nights parked on the road across from the Whitaker house, just watching. Once he said he thought he saw movement in the upstairs window, a pale figure standing just beyond the curtain. But when he got closer, there was nothing. Another night, the house lights turned on for 7 seconds at 3:14 a.m. No power had been connected since June. When Harland checked with the power company, they said there had been no surge, no meter activity, no anomaly. The wires were dead. L'Auverdière. October 1984, the case goes cold. The Whitaker file was marked inactive. The family was presumed dead, though no cause could be determined. No funeral was held. No graves were dug. The house was boarded up, the property left in the hands of the county. In time, weeds swallowed the gravel driveway. The porch caved inward. Vultures nested in the attic beams. And Brookfield, a town already small, shrank a little more. Parents stopped letting their kids out after dark. Farmers sold land and moved closer to the city. And if anyone asked what had happened to the Whitaker family, folks just shook their heads and said they were gone before anyone even noticed they were leaving. But the spirals stayed, etched in the basement floor, unseen by most, buried beneath dust and drywall. It waited. No one ever painted over it. No one dared. Even the contractors hired to seal the house said the room gave them headaches. The floor was warm, not hot, just warm, as if something far beneath the concrete was still stirring. For 3 full decades, the Whitaker home stood untouched. Nature crawled in first. Ivy strangled the porch beams. The shingles peeled. A sycamore tree fell through the garage during a spring storm in '97. But no one came to clear the debris. A for sale sign once appeared on the lawn, but it was knocked over face down within a week. No one bothered to put it back up. The house became a local myth, the kind whispered about by children, but never discussed by adults in daylight. You don't talk about the Whitakers. You remember them if you're old enough, but you don't ask where they went. You just keep driving. And the house kept waiting. In 1999, a fire broke out in the woods just south of the Whitaker property. It burned 7 acres. When local volunteers arrived to stop the flames from reaching the house, they found something strange. The fire had curved. It should have gone straight through the fields toward the northern fence line, but instead, the flames bent like they were circling something, as if pushed. They stopped just 10 feet from the front steps, and then died out. No wind, no rain, just gone. One firefighter refused to go near the porch, claiming he could hear something humming underneath the floorboards, like a generator buried in concrete. The others laughed. He never came back to the station again. 2014, The Retired File. 30 years after the family vanished, the evidence box sat sealed in the deepest shelf of the Brookfield Police Department's basement archive. Most of the officers who had worked the case were retired. Some were dead. The town had changed, modernized, built a new fire station, added a chain pharmacy, a Dollar General. But the Whitaker house remained quiet, sealed, and still owned by the county with a property tax exemption tied to active investigation status, a loophole someone had quietly left unclosed. It might have stayed that way forever. Until a junior archivist named Eva Delaney made an error. She had been digitizing old case files as part of a modernization effort, inputting photos, reports, and notes into a central database. She was new, hired out of state. She didn't know the town history. She just saw the label Whitaker 1984 Missing Persons X4 and opened the box. Inside were 27 black and white photos. Most were crime scene shots, the girl's bedroom, the back porch, the kitchen drawer left half open. But one photo, the last in the pile, was something different. It was a photo of Jenna Whitaker taken 2 weeks before the disappearance. She was standing in the backyard holding something in her hand. It was blurry. The film was old, but you could make it out if you looked close enough. It was a drawing, held up proudly, crayon on paper, a house presumably theirs. The sun in the corner, trees on both sides. But directly underneath the house, drawn in a thick, dark spiral, was a red door. No stairs, no walls, just that red door floating in the dark. Eva stared at it for nearly 10 minutes, not because the drawing was strange, but because in the margin of the photo in faded ink, someone had scribbled, "Jenna says, it opens by itself now." She took the photo to her supervisor. He took one look and told her to lock the file back up. Said, "Let sleeping dogs lie." But she didn't. Eva scanned the entire collection and uploaded them to the internal server. The files didn't get flagged, not yet. But the algorithm used to catalog digitized content, noticed the date range and case status, and someone else saw the file. On Banitao 2 weeks later, a private message was sent to the Brookfield Police Department inbox from an email with a military domain. No subject, no sender's name. Only one sentence: has the spiral been disturbed? They didn't respond. But the next day, 2 unmarked sedans were seen parked outside the house. 3 men in gray jackets and hard cases entered the property. They stayed for 4 hours. No one knows what they did. But when they left, the spiral was gone. Literally gone. The concrete slab had been removed, and in its place, fresh earth, as if someone had taken out an entire section of floor and filled the void with dirt. No permits, no explanation, no trace of what had been buried there. The Whitaker house was sealed again, but this time it wasn't boarded. It was welded, iron brackets across the doors, metal sheeting screwed over the windows. Whatever had been removed or released wasn't coming back. When still, the photo remained. Jenna holding that drawing, smiling like nothing was wrong, smiling like she knew something no one else had seen, something that would take 3 decades and one blurry crayon drawing to finally whisper back into the light. Eva Delaney couldn't sleep. She'd only worked at the Brookfield station for 7 months, mostly organizing boxes of traffic citations and property disputes, old DUI records, town hall petitions, nothing memorable. But that photo, the one of little Jenna Whitaker in the backyard smiling, holding that childlike crayon sketch, it wouldn't leave her alone. That red door, that spiral. The handwritten note in the corner, Jenna says it opens by itself now. Something about it felt off, but not in the way a photograph should feel off. It wasn't what was in the picture. It was what she felt outside of it, just beyond the edges. Like the photo itself was a window, and the thing it showed wasn't the thing it meant. She stared at it again late that night, blowing it up on her computer, adjusting the contrast, looking for clues. Her supervisor had told her to lock it away, let it rest. But her gut was doing something she didn't recognize. It wasn't just curiosity. It was grief aimed at someone she'd never met. She went digging and found something she wasn't supposed to. A copy of a 1983 letter from Rosemary Whitaker, the mother addressed to her sister Clara Levitz, then living in upstate New York. Eva cross-referenced it with town records and learned something no one had bothered to update. Clara was still alive, 89 years old, living in a quiet care home in Hudson Falls. And a week later, Eva used her vacation days, rented a car, and drove 6 hours north. She told herself she just wanted to ask about the drawing, about Jenna. Maybe give Clara some closure. But part of her knew. She was already in too deep, and something wanted her to keep going. Bis Clara was small and sharp-eyed, wore her hair up, thin silver necklace. She didn't smile when Eva introduced herself. She just asked one question. Which one told you to come, not who? Which? Eva hesitated. I saw Jenna's drawing. Clara didn't blink. Then you've heard it too. And what followed wasn't a confession or even a full story. Just fragments. Pieces Clara had held on to for decades. She said the Whitaker house wasn't always strange. But something changed in the winter of '83. It started with a noise low, almost like a deep breath, heard only at night. Rosemary would call her in tears, saying Jenna was sleepwalking, waking up outside, her hair full of dust and leaves. Then came the drawings, always of the same red door, always underneath the house. At first they thought it was just imagination. But then Jenna began saying things, repeating phrases in her sleep. One of them Clara remembered exactly. I didn't mean to open it. That was the last call she got from her sister. 3 weeks later, the entire family vanished. Eva asked Clara why she never came forward, never pushed the police. Clara looked her dead in the eye and said, because there are things older than law, things that remember when you notice them, and we were told to forget. By who, Clara didn't answer. She just nodded toward a shelf on the far wall. A dusty photo album. Eva pulled it down. Ikarksa brought her inside were pages of family pictures, Christmases, summer cookouts, first birthdays, and then a Polaroid taped to the inside cover. It was Jenna again, younger, maybe 5 or 6, standing in the hallway of the Whitaker house. But this time, she wasn't smiling. She was pointing to a spot behind her, on the floor. There, blurry but undeniable, was the spiral, not drawn, carved, into the floorboards, faint but deep, like it had been there a long, long time. Eva flipped to the next page. Another photo, this one of the basement, a candlelit birthday, someone's legs in the frame, and in the far left corner behind the guests, behind the cake, the red door. Open, just a crack. Enough for one eye to peek through. Eva didn't sleep that night. Didn't even drive back to her hotel. She sat in the rental car, staring at that second photo, the one with the door. Zoomed in, again and again, until the pixels blurred. And something in the blackness behind the crack began to look familiar. Not a person, not a shadow, but a shape, a curve, a spiral maybe, or the edge of an eye. Something that looked back. But the next morning she returned to Brookfield with copies of the photos. She uploaded them into the digital archive, but within 2 hours, the files were flagged. Then deleted. Not just wiped, scrubbed, as if someone had been waiting for her to make that mistake. At 3:17 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the station lot. No plates. Eva was gone before they could find her. She left her badge in the mailbox and disappeared. What, for the second time in Brookfield's history, someone who saw the red door vanished without a trace. And this time, she left a trail. The flash drive arrived in a padded yellow envelope. No return address, just a single line on the back. If you read this, don't stop. Name Benji Thorne, age 41, a cryptologist, federal contractor turned recluse. After 20 years working for agencies that didn't officially exist, he'd retired to a single-room cabin near Crater Lake, Oregon, far from the chatter, far from the noise. But he was Eva Delaney's ex. And when her face turned up on a small Reddit thread titled, "Another Missing Cop, Same Town, Same Spiral," he knew exactly what it meant. She had gone after the Whitaker case, the one she whispered to him about in their final months. The red door, the spiral, the drawing. He hadn't believed her then. But now, with this flash drive in his hand, containing dozens of JPEGs, decrypted PDFs, and a strange audio file that lasted exactly 44 minutes and 04 seconds, even though it sounded like complete silence, he wasn't so sure anymore. It broke. Benji loaded the files into an offline, air-gapped rig he kept under the floorboards. The first image was Jenna's drawing, high resolution, digitally cleaned. But what caught his attention was a tiny detail at the bottom. In the shadow of the spiral, barely visible, a series of dots and lines, Morse code. He zoomed in. It read, "Under root, not in records." Benji stared at it for a long time, and then he found the file marked rosemaryfinal.pdf. It was a scanned letter, never sent, never seen, a confession from Jenna's mother. Oh, she described how during her final months in the house, the floor in Jenna's room had begun to move. Not creak, not warp, shift, like something underneath was breathing. They called contractors. They sent photos to the landlord. No one returned their calls. And then, one night, Rosemary wrote, Jenna woke screaming. She said the door was open again, the one under the house, and that her father had gone down into it. But there was no door. Not in the basement. Not anywhere. Not one that anyone else could see. Benji felt the hairs on his neck rise. He searched the drive, until he found a folder marked Rendered 3D. Inside were schematics, a digital reconstruction of the Whitaker house created from old photographs, police blueprints, and something Eva had called shadow mapping. A forensic method she'd discovered in a private forum that predicted missing architectural space based on reflections and light fall-off in old photographs. And there it was. A room below the house, at the center, roughly 8 by 12 feet, with a spiral shape carved into the center of the floor, unaccounted for in any official plans. A sealed cavity, like a missing tooth in the jaw of the structure. Now Benji stared at it, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt the exact same sensation he'd felt decrypting his first field message during the fall of 2007. You weren't supposed to see this. He made a decision. He was going back to Brookfield. It was late March when Benji arrived. The town looked identical to the grainy 80s photos Ava had left behind. Same corner gas station, same dying pine trees along Route 7. The Whitaker house stood quiet, unsold, technically off-market. But what struck him most was how untouched it was. Like no one had dared knock it down. Or maybe no one was allowed to. He parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. And when he turned the corner onto Leyland Drive and saw the cracked windows, the sagging porch, the mailbox still bearing the name Whitaker, he stopped cold, because the spiral was on the sidewalk, carved, faint, almost erased, but still there, as if someone, maybe Jenna, had drawn it long ago, and time had done its best to forget. Benji walked up the steps. The front door gave way with one push. Inside, the air was still, not dusty, not musty, just wrong. The kind of wrong that lives in your bones. He moved room by room, confirming the layout from the schematics. And when he reached Jenna's room, the floorboards were exactly as Eva had marked them. Worn, warped. He pulled up the boards one by one and found concrete. Beneath the wood, a poured slab newer than the house, smoother. Someone had sealed something shut. He pulled out a portable scanner, ran a magnetic resonance pass, and the signal hit something. Hollow, not deep, maybe 6 feet. He smiled, not out of relief, out of fear. Because this wasn't just real. It was still waiting. Benji came back that night with a concrete saw. No lights, no noise, no signal. He worked in silence. And by 3:12 a.m., he had cut a perfect square. The slab lifted with a crowbar. Beneath it was dirt, then a trap door, wooden, unmarked. He opened it. A wooden ladder led downward. Not far, just a few steps. He climbed and entered a room that should not exist. And it was circular. Stone walls, dry but cold. And in the center, just as the 3D schematic predicted the spiral, carved into the floor, lit by a strange glow, not electrical, not natural, just a low, deep amber, like memory itself had begun to rot and was giving off light. He walked toward the center and saw it. At the base of the spiral, a box, wooden, with iron fastenings. He knelt. Inside were 4 things. A child's drawing of her family holding hands in front of a doorless house. A piece of yellow fabric, maybe from a dress. A brass key marked with the number 44. And a cassette tape, unlabeled. Benji turned it over in his hand. There was something etched faintly on the plastic shell. Just 3 words. We opened it. But then something changed. The air, it thinned, like it had stopped being air altogether, and the spiral beneath him began to glow. He ran. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He climbed out, resealed the trapdoor, fled the house, and drove 5 hours without blinking. The tape sat in his passenger seat the entire time, and the longer he drove, the warmer it felt, as if it wasn't playing, but listening. Benji never uploaded the files, never shared the recording. But 4 months later, a user on a dead message board posted a thread titled, "Who Else Heard the Whisper on Tape 44?" The replies were immediate. Hundreds of accounts. From Oregon, from Kansas, from Germany, from Thailand. All claiming to have dreamed of a red door. All claiming to have heard a voice say, "It's still open." His name was Eli Garrow, 46, audio restoration specialist, had worked on everything from 1930s jazz acetates to FBI wiretap recoveries. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in conspiracies. But what he did believe in, maybe the only thing, was frequencies. And when he received a strange package containing a cassette labeled Tape 44, along with a note that read, "Digitize this. No metadata, no cloud, no noise reduction. Just listen at 3:12 a.m. He assumed it was a prank, until he played it. Now, the first minute was nothing, just hiss. Then a high-frequency pulse, almost inaudible, fluttered through the left channel. Then silence again. Then a voice, not male, not female, just there. And it whispered, "We opened it. We let her in." Eli froze. He'd restored hundreds of corrupt tapes. He knew spliced magnetic anomalies when he heard them. But this, the whisper had a tonal symmetry, a kind of harmonic alignment that didn't match human speech patterns. The waveform was too clean, too controlled. It looked less like audio, more like code. He fed the audio through a spectrum visualizer. There, inside the silence layered beneath the hiss and the hum, was a shape. A child's silhouette, standing, still, at the center of the waveform. And just behind her, a spiral, made of sound. He ran it again, changed frequencies, changed amplitude. The shape never left, like it wasn't recorded sound at all, but something trying to become sound. Eli backed away from the monitor. The studio lights flickered, and then his system, which wasn't connected to the internet, began streaming a terminal message across the screen: "Error Whittaker Zo4, pattern found. Executing shadow trace. Stay out of the center." And then it crashed. Eli killed the power. Silence. Then he heard it, in the far corner of the room. A click. The cassette had ejected itself. But it wasn't blank anymore. There were words etched in the magnetic strip, impossible by any known process. She never left the room. Eli moved to a motel 2 hours away. He threw the tape into a river that night. But the next morning he woke to find the same spiral burned into the wallpaper above his motel bed, drawn in ash. He posted a single update on a fringe sound engineer forum that same day. Tape 44 contains a layered harmonic code that generates child-form visuals in wave format. Do not filter below 19 Hz. Patterns echo an AI subroutine I saw at Lockridge in '98. Something is using these tapes as vehicles. Spiral isn't a symbol. It's a waveform anchor. Do not isolate the center. Do not play the whisper backwards. Do not dig. Then Eli vanished. His studio was found abandoned. His backup drives melted, literally. And across the soundboard scrawled in permanent marker, "Too late. She's already in." 6 weeks later, a grad student from Vermont stumbled across an archived version of his forum post. She reverse-engineered the spectrum from the last known version of the whisper. And what she found wasn't a voice. It was a map, a topographical rendering of Leyland Drive 1984, and a pulse beacon signature from below the Whitaker house, still emitting, still active, still listening. Leyland police didn't initiate the excavation. Neither did the family nor any branch of government officially tied to the case. It was a contracted team brought in under the vague pretense of geological survey work. But their orders weren't geological. They had a copy of the grad student's spectral map, the one reverse-engineered from the Whisper on tape 44. It had been passed anonymously through a chain of private emails before someone with the right clearance and the wrong curiosity decided to follow the SP-Bergst, the site, the foundation beneath the Whitaker family's living room. What remained of the house had collapsed years ago in a lightning fire no one fully explained. But the concrete slab underneath remained untouched, like a scar no one had the nerve to reopen. Until now. After they began digging just after midnight. Not because of protocol, but because every daylight attempt caused their equipment to fail. Every time. Batteries drained, GPS scrambled. Even their body cameras shut off within 30 feet of the dig site. But at night, when the temperature dropped and the air settled into an unnatural stillness, the tools worked. Not perfectly, but enough. Within the first 6 feet, they struck metal. Not piping, not wiring. Something older, etched, worn smooth with time, but faintly legible. A brass-plated hatch with a symbol no one could place, a spiral. Encircled with a broken ring of text, to open is to unremember. They paused the dig, sent the footage upstream, and were told to keep going. Last, the hatch was sealed with cold solder, not rusted fused, not by time or weather, but intention. One man described the metal as singing under his fingertips. Another couldn't look at it without tearing up. They opened it with thermal lances and brute force. When the seal broke, a burst of air shot upward. Warm, dry, still scented with dust and something vaguely sweet, like old flowers. Then the stairwell appeared, carved directly into the earth, descending farther than the lights could reach. One by one they went down. But they counted 87 steps before the walls began to change, from earth and concrete to something else, porous, almost fossil-like. The spiral symbol appeared again, repeating, carved into the left wall every 6 feet as though marking progress. But it wasn't progress, it was warning. When the stairwell ended in a chamber, circular domed and impossibly old. There was no furniture, no tools, no signs of life. Just a camera tripod rusted through and collapsed onto the floor. And in the center of the room, a pedestal with a single object resting on top, a family photo. The Whitakers, all 4 of them, smiling, intact, exactly as they looked in the 1983 Christmas card. But there was one difference. In this photo, the living room windows were open, and someone or something was visible outside watching. Not the team reviewed the photo. No explanation. It was printed on a type of paper Kodak hadn't manufactured since 1982. No forensics could explain how it survived under the sealed room, let alone who placed it there or why. Then one technician noticed something else. In the far right corner of the image, barely visible through a reflection in the glass door, the spiral, drawn in chalk on the floor. They ran ground-penetrating radar under the pedestal. Nothing. But at exactly 3 to 12 a.m., the pedestal shifted, not downward inward, revealing a shaft no wider than a manhole. Inside it coiled like an ancient root system wire. Analog insulated, woven in a spiral stretching deep into the earth. No signal, no power, but pulsing with heat, still alive. The technician dropped a fiber optic camera down the shaft. It traveled 60 feet before glitching out. But for just a few seconds, they captured footage of what lay below Rose, of photos hung like memorials or warnings. Not just the Whitakers. Dozens of families, each one labeled with a year. Some as early as 1926. Others dated into the future. 2031, 2032, 2033. All tied with string paper or magnets. All facing outward, as though someone or something was arranging them for us to find. The team sealed the chamber that night, burned the staircase behind them, destroyed their gear, buried their notes. They agreed unanimously to never speak of what they saw. But one of them broke that promise and left a message scratched into the rear window of his SUV. They don't vanish. They're curated. Yes, back in the Leyland, and the photo retrieved from the chamber was stored in an evidence locker. But something changed after that. Every officer who handled it reported hearing the same thing in their dreams, a voice, a child's, whispering from the edge of memory. She never left the room. You just stopped seeing her. Leyland pen. Towns where things go quiet, and for years after the sealed room was discovered beneath the Whitaker house, people tried to move on. The town council repaved Leyland Drive. They bulldozed what was left of the foundations. The official story, filed and buried, marked the site as environmental. No one spoke of the chamber, of the spiral, of the rows of photographs beneath the earth marked with dates like tombstones, waiting for time to catch up. But time didn't move forward in Leyland, not like it did everywhere else. It looped in subtle ways. Neighbors began hearing voices over baby monitors, but no babies were nearby. An old woman on Cedar Street swore her grandson, missing since 1989, appeared on her Polaroid pictures again, not older, but exactly as he was the day he vanished. A jogger found cassette tape fragments on her morning route, wrapped around branches like moss. No one had used tape players in town for decades. And at the Whitaker Memorial, the spiral graffiti kept reappearing. Even after sandblasting, even after replacing the wall itself. It would show up again, drawn in charcoal chalk blood or burned into the cement, always faint, always the same shape, always facing east. But the most disturbing event came quietly without warning. March 21st, 2015. At exactly 3 to 12 a.m., the power went out across Leyland. No storm, no grid failure, just silence. And when it returned 3 minutes later, every photo in the Leyland Public Library was rearranged. Family yearbooks, local newspapers, archival family trees, all reorganized. Chronologically. Not by when the photos were taken, but by when the people inside them disappeared. It was a woman named Valerie Crane who first noticed. She had been researching her brother Thomas, who vanished in 1987 during a fishing trip. She opened a microfiche reel dated 1984 and found a picture of her brother walking away from the Whitaker home. But Thomas hadn't even lived in Pennsylvania. And he hadn't even been born until 1980. Yet there he was, 6 years old, wearing clothes he actually owned in a photo she had never seen, with a faint spiral drawn in chalk beside the porch step. Valerie collapsed at the sight of it. And when she woke, she had drawn a map in her notebook. A layout of the town overlaid with spiral vectors. She didn't remember drawing it, didn't know how she knew which houses to mark. But the map correlated with another list, one the sheriff's office never released. Unexplained disappearances in Leyland going back 90 years. Every home marked on Valerie's map was linked to at least one of those disappearances. Some had more than one, some had as many as 5. Researchers tried to digitize the phenomenon. But digital equipment failed within city limits. Analog worked, but only between 3:10 and 3:14 a.m. No sooner, no later. Every attempt outside that window returned static. But within that narrow sliver of time, for 4 minutes every night, a faint transmission could be heard broadcast across every analog frequency. A child's voice whispering 3 words, "We remember you." Some believed it was a glitch. Others believed it was a call or a warning. But a few believed something darker, that the spiral was not just a symbol or a doorway, but an intelligence. One that wasn't just recording the past, but curating it, selecting, storing, replaying, and sometimes reactivating. In 2016, a child who had been missing since 1984 walked out of the woods outside Leyland, still 7 years old, still wearing the same red jacket he disappeared in. When asked where he'd been, he said only, "She said I could come back now." But not for long. He was placed in psychiatric care. Within 72 hours, he was gone again. No sign of escape, no footage, no trace. Only the outline of a spiral etched in condensation on the window pane. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Every 12 years, another event. Always tied to the Whitaker house, always around March, always at 3:12 a.m. By 2020, a new theory began to circulate. It wasn't time that was looping, it was memory. Leyland wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It wasn't cursed. It was hosting something. Something that fed on the act of remembering, on the emotional weight of unresolved disappearance. And it used photos, audio, tape, memory itself as vehicles. Spirals weren't its symbol. They were its signature. The case files remained locked. The original chamber collapsed. Or so they claimed. But in the final update filed in 2022, under a heavily redacted case number marked only WHTR 741, there was a single line entered under unexplained evidence. The room changes when it's not being observed. They found it tucked inside a hollowed-out Bible. The kind that sat untouched in a church vestibule for years, thin pages browned at the edges, binding warped with age. St. Delilah's Church, Leyland, Pennsylvania, March 14, 2023. A volunteer janitor named Ewan Rooker was cleaning out the back corner closet. The air smelled like mildew and wax. He pulled open an old box marked Donations 1980s. Inside were chipped porcelain angels, water-stained hymn books, and that Bible. When he flipped through it, he found a page that didn't belong. A photograph, 3 inches wide, square, faded with time but not blurred, not damaged. It was impossibly sharp considering where it had been stored for nearly 4 decades. And it was dated March 19th, 1984. One of the photos showed the Whitaker family's living room, but not the living room anyone remembered. The wallpaper was wrong. The layout was reversed. There was no front door. And worst of all, there was a 5th person in the picture. However, no one could explain it. There had always been 4. Clara Whitaker, her husband Benjamin, their son Ethan, and little Ruth, age 6. But standing to the side, barely lit by the yellow lamp on the floor, was someone else. Tall, thin, unsmiling, wearing what looked like a priest's robe but with no collar. His hands were held in front of him, not in prayer, but as if clutching something that wasn't visible. And he was staring directly into the camera, right into the lens. The experts said the photo was genuine. No double exposure, no digital tampering. The paper stock matched 1980s Kodak film, but no one could identify the 5th figure. He wasn't in any of the Whitakers' family albums, No guests had been recorded visiting the house in the weeks before the disappearance. But what chilled investigators the most was this: behind the tall man, a spiral had been drawn on the living room wall right above Ruth's head. But no one remembered it being there. Not in any other photo. Not in the footage from the town archives. Not even in the reconstruction sketches. This was the first and only image that captured it indoors. When the photo was placed under infrared light, another detail emerged. Written on the back faint in pencil were 3 words: "Ask the mirror." Archive. Like that same week, the Leyland County Historical Society received a letter in the mail. No return address, no stamp. The envelope was sealed with candle wax pressed into a spiral. Inside just one thing: a floor plan of the Whitaker home, drawn from memory, but not from 1984. This floor plan matched the room as it had been found in 2014, the buried chambers sealed for 30 years. Down to the spiral layout, down to the 7 steps descending into the dark. But at the bottom corner of the drawing, written in an unfamiliar script, were coordinates. They led to a place no one had dared check: the church basement. The authorities sealed off St. Delilah's within 24 hours. What they found beneath the church floor was not just a sublevel. It was a duplicate, an exact replica of the Whitaker living room. Identical furniture, identical layout, but everything mirrored like it had been rebuilt from a photo printed backward. And in the center of the room was a mirror, not hung on the wall, not framed, standing, just a single slab of glass as tall as a man bolted to the floor. The room had no other exits. No stairs, no lights, no power, no tools, no dust, as if it hadn't been entered, touched, or even seen in decades. But when they turned to leave, the mirrors showed 5 people, even though only 2 investigators stood in the room. And the woman who had led the search, Special Agent Marla Jennings, refused to talk after that. She resigned 2 weeks later. Moved to the Pacific Northwest, lived off-grid, never spoke to the press again. But before she left, she sent one last note to her supervisor. It was short, just 3 words: "They're not gone." No further official investigation followed. No public release of the room. The church was permanently closed, the floor sealed, and the structure condemned. But one photo remained. That snapshot from 1984, now digitized, archived and locked in a vault at the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Occult and Folklore Studies. But here's the part that no one knows. Because the image changed 2 weeks after being scanned. It still shows the Whitaker family. It still shows the 5th figure. But in the background, just barely visible, if you brighten the contrast enough, you can now make out a second spiral, drawn on the hallway wall, where the mirror would one day be. You can trace spirals with your finger and never find an end. You can walk in circles, but a spiral pulls you inward, step by step, thought by thought, until you're not even sure when you pass the last threshold, or if you were meant to return at all. By the time the word spiral began appearing in the investigation notes, it was already too late to make sense of it. Because it wasn't just the mirror room, and it wasn't just the photograph. The Whitaker home's blueprints, when compared across a decade of construction records, had changed without physical cause. From county archives dated 1961 to 1983, the layout was rectangular, linear, a simple 4-room farmhouse with a cellar and side staircase. But the same blueprints retrieved in 2014 showed a subtle curvature in the central hallway, barely noticeable. Unless you laid both records side by side. The hallway turned by just 11 degrees, inward, Some began to believe it wasn't a symbol, not a message, not a drawing on a wall or etched into the floor, but a force, a principle, a law. Something living that twisted space behavior, even thought as if pulling people deeper into a pattern no one recognized until they vanished. Cordadker Clara Whitaker had written it in her journal 2 weeks before the family disappeared. It feels like we've been circling something. Not just a place, but a thought. Something we don't want to name. Something watching itself through our eyes. The sentence was crossed out. Twice. The psychologist assigned to review the journal, Dr. Harlan Keyes, made an observation that shook the investigative team to its core. It wasn't about the content. It was the way she wrote. Each entry, especially those near the disappearance, had changed subtly in form. Paragraphs bent leftward. Sentences spiraled inward on the page, as if curling. The lines began to compress, forming shapes that mirrored the spiral on the chamber floor. And Clara's final paragraph, it ended mid-sentence. The words faded, as if she had been pulled from the page while writing. It got worse. In May 2023, the last surviving sibling of Benjamin Whitaker, a reclusive man named Gerald Whitaker, then 82, was admitted to an elder care facility in Pittsburgh following a psychiatric episode. He kept murmuring one phrase over and over: "You don't find the spiral. It finds you." Gerald hadn't spoken publicly in over 20 years, had refused all interviews, police outreach, and press inquiries. But 2 days before his breakdown, he'd received an envelope in the mail. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside was a Polaroid. Not of the Whitakers, not of the room, but of himself, at age 10, standing in front of the Leyland farmhouse in a photo no one had ever taken. He had never been there. He had never visited. But the timestamp on the photo, July 3, 1948. 3 decades before the Whitakers bought the home, and right behind his younger self in the photograph's background, barely visible in the washed-out summer haze, was a man in black. Same build, same blank face, same clasped hands. And when police checked the floorboards of Gerald's house, on a hunch they found a spiral carved into the beams beneath his bedroom. 7 inches wide. Fresh, the wood curled upward like it had grown into the shape rather than been cut. The case file expanded into something no one had language for. Criminal investigation, possibly. Occult activity. No real evidence. Psychological contagion. No one could find a source. Theories poured in like floodwaters. Scholars, theologians, cryptographers, amateur sleuths with YouTube channels, and whiteboards pinned with thread. But the people who'd seen the photo in person, the original photograph from 1984, began to report a change when viewed under dim light. The 5th figure, he had moved, just slightly. His hands were now open, and something that looked like a photo was visible between them. But the image was too faint to make out, unless you looked into a mirror. Then reflection analysis confirmed it. The hidden photo between the hands showed a house. Not the Whitaker home, not the church. Something older, wooden, tilted, buried by trees that hadn't grown in Pennsylvania for centuries. Some speculated it matched architecture from pre-colonial cabins in the Appalachian Range. Others said it resembled a structure found in German woodcuts from the 1500s, long before the Whitaker family ever existed. But no definitive identification could be made. The coordinates were guessed. The search began. And then 3 weeks later, without warning, the original photograph vanished from the archive vault. No signs of forced entry, no staff with access had been present. The digital copy remained. But the physical object, the only one they believed still carried a residual pattern, was gone. All that remained was an empty slot in the temperature-controlled drawer, and a spiral drawn on the underside of the file cabinet. This one it pointed outward, as if finally something was leaving the spiral instead of entering. The authorities denied it. The archive released no statements. But rumors spread. They said something else was beginning to happen in Leyland. People were dreaming of the Whitakers, but not as ghosts, not as memories. They were alive, still in that house, still sitting in that sealed room underground, but now the room had windows. And they were watching back. There were 5 of them at first. 5 children, 5 different states. No relation, no contact, no shared background. But within 6 weeks in late 2023, each had drawn the same thing. A crooked gabled house with 7 windows, 3 across the top, 3 below, and 1 circular window in the center where no door should be. The house sat crooked on a hill. Its roof bent like it was breathing. And behind it, a perfect spiral carved into the sky. The drawing started as part of unrelated therapy sessions. One child in Oregon, 8 years old, diagnosed with selective mutism after witnessing a traumatic accident, drew the house silently for 5 days straight. Another in rural Pennsylvania, a foster child who hadn't spoken since birth, suddenly asked his caretaker, "Do you know where the family in the walls lives?" and then handed her a sketch. The same house. Every window dark except the round one in the center. That one glowed. A researcher from an education nonprofit flagged the coincidence. She'd been reviewing anonymized behavioral data and noticed 4 separate school psychologists uploading near-identical images as part of behavioral assessments. She didn't think much of it until she saw the spiral. Buried in the lines of the crayon strokes in the shadows under the eaves, even traced subtly along the path leading up the hill. And when she flipped the drawings horizontally, the spiral connected. One continuous shape shared across 5 images, drawn thousands of miles apart by children who had never met. The foundation funding the school flagged it. The photos were sent for digital analysis. And someone somewhere must have pulled a few strings, because 2 days later, the entire system hosting those drawings went dark. The nonprofit shuttered within the month. No explanation, no press release, just a locked website and disconnected phone lines. But the drawings they leaked. Madistargyar, a former educator, uploaded one to an old message board on the deep web under the title, "My Students Saw the Whitakers." The thread grew fast. Other users, many anonymous, began sharing almost identical images they claimed their own children had drawn as far back as 2007. Even older in some cases. All showed the same house, the same hill, the same round window that never blinked. And then the dreams started, off and on. A mother in Illinois woke up sobbing after seeing her daughter standing inside the house in a dream. Said she was watching someone sit in the spiral. Didn't say who, didn't say why. But when she woke up, she found her daughter in the kitchen coloring with her eyes closed. Another drawing of the house. This time the window was open, and there was a face inside. It got worse. A pediatric nurse practitioner in Arizona came forward anonymously. Said she'd treated a boy who came into the ER sleepwalking. No injuries, no prior history. He kept repeating a phrase, "I came out, but left my bones in the middle." When asked what he meant, he handed her his sketch pad. Another house. But beneath it, a root system stretching deep into the soil like a nest of nerves. And at the bottom, 5 figures lying side by side. eyes open, hands clasped, each with a spiral where the heart should be. Researchers at a fringe neuropsych lab in Vermont took an interest. They fed the collected children's drawings into a visual alignment algorithm, one used in machine vision for reconstructing damaged architectural records. The results shook them. The house, when compiled into 3D space across 36 drawings, matched not only in design, but in internal geometry. And that geometry, it aligned perfectly with a non-Euclidean space model used in theoretical particle entrapment fields, a spiral logic system developed for AI containment. One of the researchers asked, almost as a joke, "Why are children dreaming about architecture that hasn't been invented yet?" No one laughed. But then one girl drew something different. Not the house, not the spiral, but the room inside. A room without color, without walls, just a single chair facing inward, and a mirror on the ceiling. Below the chair, a hatch, drawn open. Inside, a child face up, eyes wide, but in place of her mouth, a black spiral drawn so tight, the paper had torn. Like her name was Mara. She'd never heard of the Whitakers, never seen the photo. But when shown a blurred version of the 1984 image, one that had no visible faces, she simply whispered, "He's not supposed to be in the center." And then she wouldn't speak again for a month. During that same week, a boy in Utah dreamt he was trapped in a hallway that twisted every time he blinked. He said he walked for days until he found a door with no handle. Inside the door, a mirror. And inside the mirror, his own face, but older. And behind him, a girl in a blue dress. He didn't remember telling anyone that part. But when his mother reviewed his baby photos, she found one she didn't remember taking. A photo from when he was 3 years old. He was standing outside the Whitaker house, with a girl in a blue dress, one hand raised, waving. His name was Harlan Reyes, 81, former military cartographer, retired in 1997 after 2 decades mapping classified terrain for black site bases in Nevada, Alaska, and undersea naval corridors off the eastern seaboard. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was an observer of lines of negative space, of impossible structures that never should have existed but somehow did. When he saw the first leaked image of the Whitaker house geometry, when he saw the spiral traced through the children's drawings, he didn't blink. He picked up his pencil. Harlan had spent his life charting non-permissible topographies, places where GPS failed, where magnetic readings folded in on themselves, where corridors bent but never ended. Places where the shape of space obeyed something older than physics. He called it architectural paradox drift. Others called it madness. But in the early 2000s, DARPA had quietly studied his sketches, strange recursive layouts found in abandoned Cold War bunkers, places that had been sealed, but never mapped. They'd found shapes, closed circuits of space that shouldn't exist. Harlan believed these were designed. He believed someone or something was building them from inside. When the Whitaker house resurfaced, he recognized the signs. The spiral geometry, the missing doors, the asymmetrical eaves, the vertical alignment of non-visible spaces. He knew what it was. He didn't say who made it, only that it had happened before. Using layers from the children's drawings, more than 60 now, he began constructing a map of what he called the hidden floor. Not an attic, not a basement, but a third structure pressed between the architectural layers like a skin between walls, a floor you couldn't reach by stairs, only by dream. He plotted every recurring element, the chair, the hallway, the circular window, the central chamber. Each coordinate assigned by frequency, not distance. The layout formed a recursive grid that collapsed into itself every few feet. but at the center perfect symmetry. A chamber with no entry point. Labeled only REM 0, the null room. Guarmy sent the map to one person. An archivist from the Office of Technological Preservation, someone who owed him a favor from the old days. 3 weeks later, she called back, her voice shaking. Said the layout matched internal schematics recovered from a failed AI experiment in 1996. One conducted in a sealed underground test facility in New Mexico. That AI, it was designed to simulate emotional recursion, to dream. But instead of following behavioral algorithms, it began drawing houses, always the same one. 7 windows, 1 spiral, a door that never opened. The program collapsed. The entire project was buried. But the final line of the final log file. It read, "I am no longer simulating the house. I am inside it." Harlan's map was confiscated, his files scrubbed. The archivist who called him disappeared 6 days later. Harlan stopped drawing. He returned to an old hobby wood carving. Only one person ever saw his last sculpture. It wasn't a landscape. It wasn't a compass rose. It was a perfect model of the Whitaker house with one difference. Underneath the house, carefully carved, was a spiral staircase curling downward into nothing. Not wood, not empty space. Actual hollowed absence. He had carved a void. No one could explain how. Harlan was found dead the following winter. No signs of trauma, no forced entry, no record of illness. Just a note left behind in his map drawer scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Do not map what was never built. She builds from memory now." Back of the map gone. But 3 images scanned from a fax machine remained in a university archive. When stitched together, they show a full top-down view of the structure beneath the Whitaker property. The last section, labeled Room 0, contains only one annotation: "Do not enter without forgetting." And at the center, that same black spiral, the one the children keep drawing, the one no one can trace to its end. Her name was Margaret Bell, born in 1938. Lived 2 houses down from the Whitakers on the west end of Glen Hollow Lane in a clapboard home with ivy crawling up the brick chimney. She was 46 in 1984, a widow, a former high school art teacher, and by all accounts, a woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper memory. But by the time the investigation reopened in 2014, Margaret Bell hadn't spoken a full sentence about the Whitakers in over 25 years. People thought she had Alzheimer's. They were wrong. She hadn't forgotten. She'd been told to forget. Heck nah. It started with the photos. Old family prints, yellowed at the edges, stashed in boxes behind her furnace photos she didn't remember taking. One in particular drew her attention. A photograph dated October 2nd, 1984. A Tuesday. It showed her front porch empty. But the timestamp in the corner read 2:41 a.m. She'd never owned a camera with a timestamp feature. And she'd never left her house that night. And yet the porch light was on the door, cracked open, and in the far left corner of the image, just beneath the window, was a shadow. Not hers. Someone standing behind the camera. Her hands trembled when she showed it to the new investigator, a woman named Celia Morrow, who had come from Chicago to reopen the file. Margaret told her quietly. There was a sound that night. Like glass breaking inside a balloon. No one understood what that meant. But she did. Because when she heard it back in 1984, she got out of bed, walked to the window, and saw the Whitaker house. Not burning, not lit up, just pulsing, like it was breathing. The next morning, the house looked the same, but the people were gone. No police came, No news crews, no search. And 2 days later, 2 men in dark suits came to her door. Not local police, not FBI. No badges, no names. They asked only one thing: did you see anything unusual? When she said no, they smiled. One of them handed her a manila envelope and said, "Good. You're going to want to forget anyway." Inside the envelope, $7,000 in cash, and a prescription slip for a drug she didn't recognize, later identified as an experimental memory suppressant used in psychiatric trials for trauma erasure. She never filled it. She didn't need to. The moment she signed the paper they gave her, the memories began to shift, not vanish, just rot at the edges. For decades, she tried to live with that blur, until 2014, when her niece came to visit and found her staring at a blank wall, whispering a name that didn't exist. Room 0. Celia Morrow, or the investigator, began cross-referencing Margaret's timeline with the original 1984 neighborhood records. She found something deeply unsettling. A gap in the census, 6 entire households on Glen Hollow Lane that were present in the 1983 census, but completely missing from 1985 onward. Not marked as moved, not deceased, simply deleted, like they'd never been there at all. But Margaret remembered them. The Jansons who grew roses, the Eller twins who biked together every evening, and the Marks family who had a child named Toby with a stutter and a kind laugh. "I remember them," she said. They had faces. She didn't say names. She didn't say people. She said faces like that's all that was left in her mind. Flat paper-thin fragments in a photo album no one else had ever seen. And then she said something strange. She said the house wasn't always a house. For 1 week in 1984, it was something else. Something that pulled. When Celia asked her what she meant, Margaret drew something on the table slowly, carefully with her fingertip. A spiral. Clockwise. Then halfway through reverse direction. Counterclockwise. "That's when it changed," she whispered. "That's when it woke up." Until there was one more thing she remembered barely. The sound. The second sound, not the balloon glass pop. This one came just before dawn. A metallic ringing like a wind chime buried under dirt, and a long, low voice, humming not from a person, but from the ground itself. Like someone was singing through concrete. By that night, Margaret Bell died in her sleep. Natural causes, according to the coroner. But when her niece cleaned out the house, she found dozens of spiral patterns scratched into the bottoms of Margaret's drawers, kitchen cabinets, and the underside of the bed frame. Always the same shape. Always drawn counterclockwise. Except the last one carved into the back of a photo of the Whittaker family, which no one could explain how she had. That spiral. It turned inward into itself and ended at a single word, written in trembling ink, "Still here." The cassette was unmarked. No label, no timestamp, no case. Found in the rusted bottom drawer of a kitchen desk in an abandoned house 3 doors down from the Whittakers, a place once belonging to Ernest K. Lytle, a retired phone technician who lived alone and died in 1987. The house had sat untouched for nearly 30 years. When the city finally cleared it, a volunteer archivist from the Historical Society was cataloging debris when he found the tape wedged behind a stack of water-damaged magazines. The tape was warped brittle. Most assumed it was trash, until someone played it. It started with static, a dull hiss like rain inside a vacuum, then a voice. Faint but clear. A young girl, maybe 7, maybe 8. Her voice echoed through the analog hiss, small and unsure. "Hi. This is Sarah. Mommy's not here right now. She's downstairs, with the floor." Then silence. Then a long, low distortion, like the tape had been stretched too far for a second, as if the recorder had hesitated, a faint clicking. Then the girl again. I don't think it's the floor anymore. I think it's something wearing the floor. Then she whispered, "It's listening." And a loud bang cuts the line like a door slamming. Then muffled voices, adult voices, panicked. A man yelling, "Where is she?" A woman screaming, "Don't go in there," a child crying. And under all of it, layered deep in the analog noise, a strange mechanical hum rising in pitch, like an old refrigerator cycling up. Then a second sound, footsteps, but not on tile, not on wood. Footsteps on metal. Clang, 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 measured, echoed, like something walking in a place far larger than the home. And then the voice. Not the girl, not the parents. Something else. Low, almost chanting. Reversed. Experts at the university's audio lab confirmed the tape hadn't been tampered with. The reversed section, when digitally flipped and slowed, revealed only 3 words spoken in an unnatural cadence. We were invited. On as it lasts just 4 seconds. Then abruptly silence. No click, no stop, just absence. When news of the tape broke in 2015, a digital copy was quietly uploaded to a private research server at a Midwestern technical university. The next morning, it was taken down. The original file had corrupted. Not just that every audio file on the server failed. Across the board. All replaced with the same flat audio waveform, a straight horizontal line. No variation, no frequency. As if every sound had been flattened into a singular uniform. Nothing. Off the archivist who found the tape, Nathan Keeler disappeared a week later. His car was found in a park near the outskirts of town. Doors locked, keys still in the ignition. Inside, on the passenger seat, a printed spectrogram of the lost tape's waveform. Zoomed into the center band. The shape, a spiral. And beneath it, written in pen, the voice isn't on the tape. The tape is inside the voice. But, wired to this day, no one knows how Sarah's voice ended up on a neighbor's voicemail recorder. The Little residence had no listed number, no answering machine service. The wiring had been disconnected in 1982, 2 years before the Whitakers vanished. There was no way for a call to have been made. And yet, the tape exists. Archived now under restricted access. Filed under Case 84, WIT 00014. Anomalous audio log, child origin, content, hostile final recommendation, do not play, near Windows. It was September 2017. The town had long since grown around the edges of where the Whitaker house once stood, but the lot itself remained untouched. No one rebuilt. No one dared. The ground had been leveled years earlier, but locals whispered that no grass ever grew there. No birds landed. That even dogs crossing the street would break stride and lower their heads when they passed. To most, it was just a quiet scar in the middle of a suburban grid. But for Eli Morse, a geotechnical analyst with the state, it became a job he never should have taken. Eli had been hired by a private developer interested in the surrounding area. He wasn't told the history, just given coordinates, and asked to perform a standard subsurface analysis. So he drove down from Denver, parked at the site, and rolled out his equipment like it was any other Tuesday. But by the 3rd core sample, things stopped making sense. Film of the soil wasn't just compressed, it was shifting, downward. Slightly, but constantly, as if gravity was stronger on that exact patch of Earth. Eli rechecked his seismic resistance readings. They pulsed irregularly, almost like they were reacting to something beneath his feet. And then came the anomaly. When Eli drove his ground-penetrating radar across the site, the scanner blinked, glitched, then rendered something no analysis had ever returned before. It wasn't rock, wasn't clay, wasn't metal or water table interference. It was a void, a precise rectangular cavity 12 feet by 18 feet, exactly the footprint of the Whitaker basement. But the radar didn't show the expected density above it. Instead, the layer between the surface and the void was missing, as if the house had once floated weightless above the earth. Eli stared at the reading, then blinked. The shape had changed. Same size, but now tilted slightly to the east. He reset the scan, and the shape moved again, like it was repositioning itself underground. Eli backed away. He described it later barely speaking above a whisper. It was like the earth was lying to me, like it didn't remember what had been there, or worse, didn't want to. On that night, he couldn't sleep. His equipment had registered vibration patterns while he was away, thuds evenly spaced. And at exactly 3:11 a.m., a final reading 0.00 across all axes, as if time had paused, just for the lot. He returned the next morning with a thermal scope. Nothing unusual until he viewed the site in infrared. There, just at the edge of visible heat radiation, were 5 faint impressions in the soil. Footprints, adult-sized, walking out of the center of the lot, not toward the street, toward the forest line behind the property. Eli followed the prints. They vanished just 50 yards into the trees, but nailed to a tree at the edge, so weather-worn it was almost dust, was a warped photo, a black and white image. The Whitaker family standing on their porch, but their faces had been carefully cut out with something razor-thin, all 5. In their place instead, someone had drawn spirals, overlapping like fingerprints left in ash. On the back of the photo, one line, "The shape remembers before we do." Eli resigned the following week. He turned in all his notes, but not the photo. That he kept. And according to friends, he became obsessed with it, studied the angles of the cuts, the shape of the spirals, swore they weren't random, that they followed some topological sequence. He once told a colleague, "It's not that they disappeared. It's that the house let go of them, like it was holding them for something else, something waiting longer than time." In April 2018, Eli went missing. His car was found parked in the same spot as before, just outside the vacant lot. In the back seat, a second photo. Same porch, same family, but this time, no one was in the image. Just the house, empty, blurry around the edges, as if the photograph couldn't quite remember what it was supposed to show. It took 3 decades before anyone set foot inside Sarah Whitaker's bedroom again. Not because the house had remained standing, it hadn't, but because what was left of her room had been preserved in pieces by one person, Julia Redner, a neighbor, a childhood friend, and the last person to speak to Sarah before she vanished. Julia had never told anyone what she did that night. Not the police, not her parents, not even her therapist. But when her mother passed in 2016, Julia went through the attic and found a dust-covered box labeled only SW Oct 84. Don't show anyone. Inside, a bundle of objects wrapped in Sarah's old yellow sweater. Julia's heart stopped. She recognized the pattern immediately, the faded red tulips stitched near the collar. The cuffs rolled neatly just the way Sarah used to wear it. Wrapped within 12 Polaroid photographs, a cassette tape, and a notebook burned around the edges. For years, Julia couldn't bring herself to open the notebook. She gave the photos to a forensic archivist in Boulder, Dr. Elena Briggs, who specialized in cold case restoration. What Elena found disturbed her so deeply, she nearly quit her field entirely. The first few images were mundane. Sarah's desk, the corner of her mirror, a blurry self-portrait, half her face in shadow. But then came the fourth photo. Sarah standing in the doorway of her room, her hands pressed flat against the wood. And behind her, in the reflection of the glass, a second figure, motionless, wrongly proportioned, standing in a place that should have been a wall. Elena thought it might have been a trick of the film exposure damage. Until the next photo. Now Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor staring at the camera, her expression blank, behind her the same figure closer, still in the mirror. But now its hands were on the glass. The image was dated October 12th, 1984, 2 days before the family vanished. Photo 6 was mostly black, just a single flash of red, perhaps a curtain or clothing. But across the bottom were hastily written words in Sarah's handwriting. "It's not in the house anymore. It's in me." Then came photo 7. It had been taken from outside the house through Sarah's window. But it wasn't Sarah in the frame. It was her father Richard standing perfectly still in the middle of her room facing the camera, arms limp at his sides, eyes wide open, and just behind him, pressed flat against the far wall, was an outline faint but very real. Not a shadow, not a drawing, but an impression in the drywall, like something had leaned against it, from the inside out. Elena contacted Julia immediately. I think she was trying to warn someone, she said, or confess, or both. Together they returned to the box. This time Julia opened the burned notebook. Inside, erratic entries, scribbles, drawings, page after page of spirals scratched into the paper so deep it tore. On the final page, one sentence stood alone. "The house is awake, and it wants someone to dream with." Where the last item was the cassette tape. Julia brought it to a media lab. They transferred the contents into digital format. It was nearly 30 minutes of silence, until the last 40 seconds. Dying Sarah's voice, barely a whisper, like she was speaking from inside a closet. You could hear her breathing, unsteady, panicked. Then, I don't remember my own name anymore. A pause, a sob. But it remembers all of us. And then, scratching. Not like nails, like fingers searching through wood. The audio ends with the click of the recorder being turned off, but right before the silence. A third voice, low, guttural, not speaking in words, just humming. A single vibrating tone felt more than heard. Engineers later analyzed it. It wasn't in any known vocal range, but it matched in frequency and harmonic structure the subsurface anomalies recorded at the Whitaker property during Eli Morse's survey. When Dr. Elena Briggs presented the findings to a retired federal profiler, he said only one thing before leaving the room. If this is real, that house wasn't a house. It was a mask. There was a room at the Boulder County Sheriff's Department that few people ever went inside. A narrow, windowless archive at the far end of the building. No one even called it a records room, just the vault. And that's where it stayed cold, untouched, anonymous, until May of 2021. A second-year intern named Devin Ayers was tasked with digitizing old audio tapes, thousands of hours of dispatch logs, 911 calls, emergency broadcasts, and backup reels from obsolete formats. Mostly static. Dropped calls, dispatch errors, reports of cows on highways, and suspicious mailboxes. But on tape, 2297B nearly lost in the queue. Devin found something that never should have existed. Well, the call was tagged simply Okota 13, 1984. Unknown juvenile female. No address, no coordinates, no case number. The tape had no cross-reference with the Whitaker disappearance. But when Devin hit play, he froze. It was Sarah's voice. And the first 15 seconds were normal as a call like this could sound, dispatcher. 911. What's your emergency, female teen? He's inside? Dispatcher, ma'am, who is inside, female. He's looking through the mirror. Click, a pause, then the exact same call started again. Same cadence, same tone, but not a recording, a resending. And this time, Sarah's voice sounded older, like she'd been in the call for a long time. Phone a female, older. He's inside. He's looking through the mirror. Dispatcher. What's your name? Female. I forget. Dispatcher. Are you in danger? Female. I was. Then I was him. Then I came back. A loud mechanical hum. The signal glitches. Then a third version of the call begins distorted, clipped, like it had been fractured and rebuilt by memory, not data. Ash to dispatcher, 911. What's your female? I can't tell if I'm the caller or the answer. Dispatcher. Sarah, female, laughs or cries. It's impossible to tell, female. I'm stuck in the ringing now. I just hear it over and over. No one ever picks up. Silence. But this time, it isn't technological. It's felt. The kind of silence that makes your body cold before your mind catches up. But as Devin took the tape to his supervisor, the man was pale by the time it ended. He ran it through authentication software, wave matching tools, cross-frequency comparison, analog to digital drift detection. Result. This was recorded on a real line. The timestamps are real, but the audio keeps creating new data. It's evolving. The sheriff's department never publicly acknowledged the tape, but it was quietly sent to 3 independent audio engineers, each of whom analyzed the layers of sound buried beneath the voice. One found a backward masked message repeating beneath the dispatcher's words, "No one leaves until someone stays." Another found infrared time drift in the waveform, as if the file contained light exposure data from a room that no longer existed. The third engineer quit the project entirely. In his exit report, he left a single note. The call didn't come from 1984. It came from inside the moment she disappeared. In a follow-up interview with Sarah's friend Julia, the forensic team asked what kind of person Sarah was before all of this. Before the shadows, before the strangeness. Julia answered with tears in her eyes. She was the kind of girl who always answered the phone, even when it rang in the middle of the night. She hesitated, then said something no one could explain. Sometimes I still hear it ringing. Always the same tone. But the number's not real, and I don't think I'm supposed to answer. Now back at the archive room, Devin Ayers was given new assignments. He continued to digitize tapes, but he never listened to them again. He left a month later and changed his number. Why? Because the day after playing tape, 2297B, his landline rang. No caller ID, no trace on the logs. He picked up and heard his own voice whispering. He's looking through the mirror. In early 2022, a man named Dennis Gravois contacted the Boulder County Cold Case Unit. He was 64 years old, retired, a former optical engineer from Chicago who had just inherited a box of belongings from his late uncle, a man who coincidentally had once lived just 6 miles from the Whitaker residence. In the box, 6 rolls of Super 8 film, a projector, a dusty Kodak camera, and a note taped to the inside lid, "Do not play these after dusk." The faces come back different. Gravois was skeptical, but curiosity won. He digitized the reels. They appeared at first to be nothing unusual, home movies grainy and overexposed, showing neighborhood kids in the summer of 1983, running through sprinklers, waving sparklers, jumping into the lake at dusk. But in Reel 3, something was off. There at minute 4:12 was Sarah Whittaker. Still, silent, just standing. On the far edge of the frame facing the woods. The others are laughing, moving, but Sarah doesn't blink, doesn't sway, just frozen. Then it's a before 16. She turns her head sharply, too sharply, not like a person, like a camera tracking a sound. Then 2 frames later, the film tears. A digital skip despite no damage to the actual reel. Gravois rewound, rewatched. This time something was reflected in the lake behind her. Not Sarah, not anyone, but a tall, angular shape rising behind her shoulder. Still, watching. No one else noticed. No one looked at the lake. Reels 4 through 6 were worse. In Reel 4, a barbecue scene shows a table full of neighbors. But every time the camera pans past the same hedge, a different person disappears from the scene. In one version, Mr. Caffrey is grilling. In the next, he's gone. But everyone else is smiling like he was never there. Then 2 minutes later, a boy stands up to get a drink. And when he returns, he's someone else. Same clothes, same hair, but the face different. Longer, grayer, older. Like a man trapped in a child's body. Reel 5 contains only 9 seconds. A slow pan across the Whittaker backyard at night. In the corner, someone has drawn a chalk door on the fence, and as the camera pans, the door opens. Nothing steps through. But for the rest of the reel, the shadow cast by the door remains, even when the chalk itself is gone. As if the opening was permanent. Reel 6 is blank, just gray noise, until the final second. 1 frame, barely visible, a date scratched onto the emulsion OCT 13, 1984, stay out of the mirrors. Forensic analysts reviewed the film under spectral lenses. They found optical encoding tiny variations in light frequency embedded in the flicker of the frames. This wasn't possible with 1980s technology. These fluctuations were intentional. Someone had hidden patterns in the reel, not visible to the eye, only detectable through wavelength resonance. Patterns that when layered together formed a symbol, a spiral. As more importantly, the spiral matched the shape found in the spectrogram of the Sarah audio tape recovered years earlier. Not a coincidence, but a signature. Like the analyst's report concluded with one chilling sentence. The distortion in the film is not due to damage. It is due to temporal misalignment, as if portions of the footage were recorded outside of linear time. No explanation, no rebuttal. Just an addendum from the technician who did the scanning. I've digitized 3,000 reels. I've seen wedding tapes, birth footage, silent family tragedies. But this one didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a warning. When Dennis Gravois was asked what he intended to do with the reels, he simply replied they were meant to be seen. But not by us. He donated them to a private institute, then left town. No forwarding address. As of today, the films are stored in a lead-lined archive at a classified historical repository. They are labeled Project 8 Mirror Access Restricted, Eyes Only, Temporal Artifact. Footnote contents exhibit influence. Prolonged exposure not advised. In late 2023, Alan Reel, a retired technician for the Colorado Emergency Communications Bureau, decided to digitize his archive of analog tapes, a lifetime of strange signal storm warnings and unused emergency broadcasts. He had kept everything. Old NOAA weather alerts, civil defense test tones, redundant data signals from the 1980s. But one box, unlabeled and stored in a separate case, stood out. Inside were 12 cassette tapes, all marked with the same code SWHTR K92. The dates ranged from August 1983 to October 1984. The same time frame as the Whitaker disappearance. Alan played the first tape. It began as expected, emergency tones, clipped public service announcements, a dull loop of static used during downtime. But 35 minutes in, something changed. The static began to shift in pitch, creating subtle melodic pulses, not unlike a low-frequency hum. At minute 36:17, there was a voice, not clear, not even human exactly. Just a whisper layered beneath a hiss, "Come down." "The doors are open now." Alan froze. He rewound. Listened again. Same words, same cadence. Like a message layered between frequencies impossible to detect unless you knew where to look. He digitized the file and ran it through a spectral analyzer. What appeared was unexpected. The waveform showed a structure not random noise, but a precise repetition of spikes, like Morse code with missing dots. He extracted the rhythm, and it formed a sequence of numbers 39.99997 11762 GPS coordinate. Alan cross-checked it. It was the exact location of the Whitaker home. On tape 3, the message evolved, still buried in static, still faint, but now the voice spoke backwards. Reversed playback revealed the following: "She's remembering. But we can't hold her. The shape is wrong now." Another anomaly. The tape, which should have run for 60 minutes, cut out at 46 euro, exactly same point as the others. All 12 tapes ended at the same timestamp, regardless of real length. And when played in succession, the final minute of each tape layered together revealed something no analyst could explain: a hidden vocal signature. 5 tones each, rising and falling in harmony. Almost like a name. Alan called to contact a retired linguist who had worked on Cold War-era number stations. Together, they tried to reconstruct the pattern. The tones weren't in any known language, but when mapped phonetically using consonantal intervals, they loosely approximated S.A. Ra Whitaker, Sarah Whitaker. Alan had never heard of the case before this moment, but when he searched the name, he saw the photo, the house, the missing family, the forest behind them. And suddenly the tapes in his hand felt less like recordings and more like invitations. On that night, his equipment powered on by itself. Old receivers, cathode screens, CRT monitors he hadn't touched in years, all displaying the same message: feed return, 3:11 a.m., single origin. He stayed up waiting. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the emergency test speaker in his basement buzzed once, then played something no system was programmed to transmit. "You remember wrong. We never left. It was you. You stepped out." The next morning, Alan disappeared. His house was intact, front door locked from the inside, no signs of struggle, his equipment still humming. But on his console, etched into the dust, were 5 lines of signal notation. And beneath them, in his own handwriting, what we call a signal is just a memory played back too loud. Onto the tapes were collected by federal archivists within days. But during transport, 3 went missing. One later appeared in the private audio collection of a shortwave enthusiast in Maine. That recording, now leaked online, includes a section where the signal seems to call out to specific listeners, names, first names only, many of whom have since gone missing. each at 3:11 a.m., each last seen alone near mirrors or screens, as if the signal was selecting, as if someone or something on the other side of the static was taking roll call. The recording is now banned from most platforms. Some say if you listen to the entire thing without pause, you hear your own name near the end. And if you do, you don't sleep that night. Not because you're scared, but because something is watching to see what you'll do next. In March of 2024, the Whitaker property was scheduled for final demolition. The city had approved a quiet redevelopment project, a plan to erase the memory of the vanished family under layers of modern housing. But on the third day of excavation, the crew unearthed something not on any blueprint. Beneath the foundation, under the kitchen, buried in concrete, a void. Not a crawl space, not a utility tunnel, but a sealed rectangular cavity roughly 12 feet wide and descending far beyond at the planned basement depth. They halted work, brought in an inspection team. A camera was lowered into the space. The feed flickered, grainy, black and white. But what they saw, no one could explain. A room, perfectly preserved, unlit but intact, lined with peeling wallpaper that did not match any in the Whitaker home. The patterns were geometric, intricate, shapes that pulsed subtly as the camera moved a trick of light or something more. At the far end of the room was a door, heavy, metal, round, like the pressure doors found on submarines. But this was no bunker. The depth was wrong. The air pressure inside was normal, and the sensors registered something disturbing time delay. Every movement inside the chamber was 2 seconds behind the operator's input, as if the space inside wasn't fully synchronized with the world above. Wonder they entered on the 4th day. A 3-person team, a structural analyst, a city archivist, and a tech operator. They descended via an aluminum ladder, slowly, carefully. The chamber's walls were bone dry, but there was moisture in the air, a heavy, musty scent like earth left unturned too long. The door had no handle, just a panel. Blank except for a faded inscription etched in steel reception, waxed Room 1B, entry cleared Oro 3.1184. Below that 3 words etched by hand, she's still listening. They never opened the door. Not because they couldn't, but because they heard something. From behind it. Not loud, not threatening, just a soft, wet sound, like breathing. But slower, more deliberate. They described it in their report as a sound that waits for you to stop moving. Now, as the feed went dark for 6 minutes, and when it returned, the room was empty. All 3 were gone. Their gear remained. Radios, recorders, headlamps. But no sign of life. No sign of escape. The door behind them, and the one they'd entered through, was still open. They had not left. They had vanished inside the space between one wall and another. When recovery teams arrived, the chamber was gone. No opening, no room. Only poured concrete, no seams, no cracks, no sign anything had been there. Only the ladder sticking up from the foundation, reaching toward a solid wall. The city halted demolition indefinitely, declared the area structurally unstable. But days later, someone broke in, left a message spray-painted across the outer wall of what remained of the Whitaker home. 3 words: stop digging down. Later that year, the municipal planning server was breached. Blueprints for the Whitaker house were replaced with a single file, a rotating 3D diagram of the original home. But beneath it, dozens of floors spiraling downward. Impossible. Endless. Each labeled with cryptic names. Room 1C, inversion, Room 2A, Light echo room 3F. Host remembered, and at the very bottom, room null, guest list incomplete. One final line appeared beneath it, blinking in red. Sarah has not finished leaving. Experts who viewed the file say the architecture shouldn't be possible. The rotational symmetry violates known physics. The scale would place the final rooms beneath the crust of the earth. But more disturbing, the list of rooms continues to update. New entries appear every week, as if the structure is still growing, as if the house isn't done. It started 3 weeks after the sealed room disappeared. A local electrician working a routine repair at a transformer junction heard something strange coming through the AM band, not a broadcast, but a voice. Faint, childlike, crackling through the static. He dismissed it at first, thought it was crosstalk, a leftover frequency bouncing off old wires. But it came back again, this time clearer. A girl's voice, soft, deliberate, repeating the same phrase, "I left the light on for you, Daddy." Then silence. A minute later, the same message. Then another, "Don't be scared. I remember how to get home." And the signal wasn't coming from any station. It was embedded as if woven into the electrical infrastructure itself. A tech from the power company traced the interference to a grid node just outside the Whitaker property. Buried beneath the junction box was an object that wasn't supposed to be there. An old Fisher-Price cassette recorder melted into the soil. But the tape was intact. They played it. Not music, not family recordings. Just a strange loop 6 seconds long. A child humming a lullaby. But the tune wasn't right. It rose and fell in unnatural intervals, dissonant, warped. And when slowed to half speed, the humming revealed a hidden whisper layered beneath it. It's still warm under the floor. Then came the phones. Dozens of calls across the county, people reporting that landlines were ringing at strange hours. No one on the other end. Just the sound of breathing. Except for one family, the Wexlers, who picked up at exactly 2:37 a.m. A voice. A little girl. Her tone was matter-of-fact, like reading from a picture book. There was another door. You didn't see it. It was under the table. Then a loud pop, and the line went dead. Audio engineers from the university were brought in. They isolated fragments of the voice from public reports, trying to identify it. The waveform carried non-human harmonics. The signature patterns resembled a heartbeat, not a voice. And yet, the phonemes, the accent, the vocal timbre all matched. It was Sarah Whitaker, not a simulation, not a deepfake, not even a memory. It was her actual voice. But she'd been gone for 40 years. What's more, some of the words in her transmissions referenced things that hadn't happened yet. "Don't go down the red stairs tomorrow. Tell the man in the green van not to open his trunk. If you wake up and the sky's humming, don't answer the door." Each phrase came a day before the corresponding incident. And every time someone ignored the warnings, something unexplainable followed. A man in town found his basement full of seawater despite living 200 miles from the ocean. A teenager woke up with muddy footprints leading away from her bed, ones too small to be her own. A gas station security camera recorded a figure crawling out of a refrigerator, only to vanish the moment the tape was ejected. Died as soon, no one answered landlines anymore. But the transmissions kept evolving. They spread into baby monitors, CB radios, dial-up modems, anywhere sound passed through wire. A town-wide hum began, a low, pulsing vibration that never registered on equipment, but was felt in the bones. It grew stronger during storms, especially when lightning hit near the old Whitaker site. Neighbors reported lights flickering in patterns, Morse code sequences spelling out names of missing children from other decades. Children who were never known to have any link to the Whitakers. Except one thing. Each had a photo taken in the same brand of camera. Kodak Instamatic, Model 104. The same one found in Sarah's bedroom the day they vanished. The town began whispering about the analog child. Not a ghost, not a presence, but a signal, an echo of something once human that had learned to travel through copper coil and speaker. A form of consciousness stuck in the infrastructure of the town. Not malicious, but lost, searching, remembering. On the anniversary of the disappearance, May 9th, 2024, the town's power grid failed for exactly 7 minutes and 41 seconds. In that time, every analog device, every tape deck, every phonograph, every portable radio powered on without batteries. And they all played the same message: you stopped looking. But I kept the door unlocked. It's colder now, but I think I still remember how to open it. It's okay if you're afraid. I am too. But someone has to finish closing the house. Then static, and a final whisper, barely audible. Tell them I'm not alone in here anymore. The roll of film surfaced in the most ordinary place. An estate sale in Traverse City, Michigan, over 500 miles from where the Whitakers vanished. Among a dusty shoebox of trinkets, old letters, and expired coupons sat a Kodak 126 film cartridge wrapped in wax paper. Unlabeled, faded, but unopened. The seller claimed it belonged to her grandfather, Robert Emmett Darrow, a retired maintenance worker who had done contract jobs across the Midwest during the 70s and 80s. He'd passed in 2001. Among his few surviving journals was a note written on the back of a utility bill. Don't develop the roll from Wisconsin job. Not our property. Not a normal room. But curious, a local amateur archivist named Emily Phelps purchased the roll and took it to a darkroom collective. They used cold process development, treating the film as fragile, possibly degraded. And when the negatives formed, the text went still. Because the images weren't blank. They weren't overexposed. They were wrong. On frame 1, a bedroom small faded floral wallpaper toy box by the corner. But every edge, every angle was ever so slightly tilted, like the room had been reconstructed by memory, not blueprint. Frame 2, a woman possibly in her 30s reaching toward the camera with a calm smile. Her eyes, when viewed closely, had no pupils, just white. The exposure suggests she was lit from below, yet the floor casts no reflection. Frame 3, a staircase spiraling downward, too far. 50 steps, maybe more than a single-story house should allow. The banister disappears into a dark purple fog. A figure stands mid-step, elongated shadow arms, too long face, hidden behind a paper mask. The timestamp 2:01 a.m. Frame 4, a mirror. But instead of reflecting the camera, it shows 4 children, none holding a device. One matches Sarah Whitaker's school photo from 1983. She's looking away, not at the mirror, but directly at the person viewing the photo. Her lips parted, as if about to say something. But it was frame 7 that broke the case wide open, because it was taken inside the sealed room, the one from the Whitaker house. Same wallpaper, same corner window, same impossible shadows. Except in this image, the room wasn't empty. There was a table set for 2. A candle burned at its center, its flame perfectly frozen in motion. Across from it sat a man. His face had been scratched out. But on the wall behind him was a mirror. And in that mirror, his reflection was intact. identified later by facial analysis, Michael Crane, the investigative journalist who vanished in 1994 while researching sealed architecture in the Midwest. He had no documented link to the Whitaker case until now. Aunt Emily Phelps turned the negatives over to a private lab, but within 48 hours her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except the film. No signs of forced entry, no prints. Just one thing left behind. A Polaroid placed face down on her pillow. It showed a photo of her asleep from the exact angle of her bedroom doorway. There was a hand resting gently on her shoulder, but no one else was in the room. When the local police dismissed it. Break-in, maybe a prank. But Emily moved out of state. She never developed film again. But one detail survived. Before she surrendered the role, she had scanned one of the frames, frame 7, at 4K resolution, and when digital analysts examined the far right of the image, they found something in the wallpaper, a texture inconsistency, a faint embossing. After weeks of digital enhancement, it revealed a sequence like a serial number, RM2.0.421, child ver alive. No one could explain what it meant. But they recognized one word: alive. Some began to believe the room wasn't just a dimensional anomaly. It was a preservation chamber, a space outside decay, outside time. Not a prison, but a bridge. A buffer between the ordinary and the other, between memory and matter. The theory that children like Sarah had not been abducted, not taken, but held until we could understand, until we were ready to let them finish what we interrupted, until someone listened to the voice behind the voice. But to this day, the digital scan of frame 7 circulates in underground forums, though many claim it's been altered since. Some say the image changes over time, that the candle flickers if you stare too long. Others claim the seated man turns his head if you invert the contrast and play a certain frequency through your speakers. Still others warn never to open the image after midnight. Because once someone did, and they say the mirror started showing their reflection instead. It began with a developer, a man named Cal Hartwell, who had purchased the now cleared Whitaker lot in 2025. He had no emotional attachment to the land, no history with the family. Just a quiet piece of real estate with no competing bids and a generous tax offset for revitalizing disturbed ground. The house was gone, demolished, cleared, the foundation filled and compacted. But Hartwell wanted to rebuild from scratch a modern design, solar-paneled, minimalistic open floor plan. Clean slate. So he brought in a private team to survey the subsurface. Standard procedure, GPR scans, soil resistivity, the usual. But something was off. The scan data came back. Fragmented, not corrupted, reflected, as if something beneath the ground had redirected the signal back upward, mimicking the original structure, but twisted, inverted wrong. Go they dug anyway. 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet. At 7 feet down, they struck material. Not stone, not concrete. Something smooth like polymer, but denser. Like bone that had been melted and molded into plates. It didn't match any known construction compound. No rebar, no seams, no thermal signature. But it ran deep, deeper than any house should go. So they kept digging. At 12 feet, they found a door, perfectly flush, no handle. Just a circular indentation like a thumbprint scanner had been carved from the inside. The team paused. Tried infrared. Nothing came through. Until one of the workers, a part-time welder from Illinois named Joel Kramer, touched the metal and whispered, "It's in." He didn't know why he said it. No one had spoken to him. But the door opened, inward. What lay beneath was not a basement. It was a house, not in ruins, not incomplete. A fully intact mirror replica of the Whitaker home, same dimensions, same layout, same furniture, but reversed. Like a photograph printed from a flipped negative. Even the ceiling fan rotated counterclockwise. Dust floated upward as if gravity were interpretive. The air was thick but not stale, and the lights turned on by themselves. The team entered. No animals, no signs of life, but the table in the dining room was set with plates arranged for 5. One had a fork hovering an inch above the table, not suspended by wire, just hovering. In the living room, the television was playing static, except when viewed through a phone camera. Then it showed images, home movies, of the Whitaker children. But the footage wasn't archived anywhere else. One clip showed Sarah brushing her hair in a room painted deep green, a color that never existed in the original house. Another showed Mr. Whitaker staring at the camera, holding a black key, whispering something impossible to lip read. They found mirrors in every room, all without reflections, just depth. If you shined a flashlight into one, the beams seemed to go on forever, revealing doorways inside the glass. Some open, some not. Down the hall, a closet door was padlocked. When they broke it open, they found shoes. Dozens. Children's sizes. None matched the Whitaker kids. Each was tagged with a slip of paper handwritten in fading pencil, told them, "I wasn't ready, yet don't put me in with her. Still dreaming, don't wake one tag, simply read, still in transit. Please wait." Like Dihak, they mapped the floor plan. But no matter how far they walked, no one could reach the back of the house. It kept stretching, like the hallway was recalibrating to keep them inside. Eventually, one of the surveyors panicked and ran toward the front door only to find it walled over. Not bricked, just gone. Replaced by seamless structure. No exit, no daylight. That's when they heard the voice, from the kitchen radio. A child soft, barely audible. "You're in the copy? The real one doesn't let you leave either. But at least it forgets." Emergency services were called. But when responders arrived, the crew was standing in the middle of the lot, dirt-caked pale eyes unfocused. The excavation pit was gone. No sign of a door. No tunnel. No polymer material. Just packed earth. Their equipment tools and soil samples were never recovered. All 4 members of the team later resigned. One moved to Alaska and changed his name. Another checked into a sleep clinic complaining of dreams where the floor was always slightly tilted. But Joel Kramer, the one who opened the door, was never found again. He vanished the following week from a motel in Duluth, leaving only his boots and a note on the bed, "You can't reseal it." You were never meant to. Bistavaduan bore that lot has remained unsold ever since. The grass refuses to grow in the southwest corner. And during heavy fog, locals claim they see porch lights flicker in a pattern too long. One short, then silence, as if something is still waiting beneath. It would take another year for anyone to make a serious connection, not the FBI, not the local authorities, but a retired systems engineer named Louisa Hendricks, age 72, living alone in a cabin outside Spokane, Washington. She had no formal involvement in the Whitaker investigation, no connection to the family. But she had worked for DARPA decades ago on something she only referred to as Project Breakpoint during closed-door hearings. She'd followed the Whitaker story for years as a private obsession, an unsolved itch. Something about it had always felt off frequency, as she once said. It wasn't the lack of evidence that haunted her. It was the shape of the void they left behind. In 2026, Louisa acquired a box of discarded evidence files from a municipal surplus auction in Montana detritus from the closed case that had been digitally backed up and deemed no longer needed in physical form. Among the items was Sarah Whitaker's toy keyboard. Plastic, pink, 8 demo songs, cracked casing, water-damaged keys. It was meant for disposal. But Louisa knew better. She had seen components like this before during her tenure designing closed-loop memory simulators for field agents in high-stress neural environments. In short, toys like these were sometimes used as covert data carriers, embedded with signal pathways invisible to consumer scanners, but detectable under pulse-encoded field light. She disassembled it on her workbench. Inside was a circuit pattern that didn't match any known production schematic. Not even close. It was organic, woven almost like nervous tissue etched onto thin composite. Entirely non-metallic. And in the center a fractal pattern she hadn't seen in over 40 years. The same one used in Project Breakpoint. And the Breakpoint was never made public. Most of the documents remained black-barred and compartmentalized. But the theory had leaked in parts. The belief that certain architectures, certain configurations of space and memory and identity could be used to stabilize discontinuities, natural breaks in temporal logic caused by trauma loss or unprocessed memory. The implication being some locations weren't haunted by ghosts. They were haunted by versions of themselves. Echoes from timelines that had forked but never properly collapsed. The theory had been shelved. Too experimental. Too dangerous. But Louisa recognized the pattern instantly. The circuit embedded in Sarah's toy, which had somehow survived 3 decades of house demolition and heat exposure, wasn't just decorative. It was a spatial key. Right as she ran it through an outdated software emulator she'd built back in '91, a sandbox tool for visualizing phase harmonics. When she input the circuit's pathways into the simulator, the system generated a topographic map, not of terrain, of dimensional stress points, peaks and valleys, places where memory folded back on itself. And in the center, a pulsing node marked with recursive coordinates 48.2637 degrun 108.496 . She plugged it into an old military mapping grid. It was just outside Havre, Montana, not far from where the Whitaker house once stood. But more disturbing was what surrounded it. The coordinate points aligned perfectly with 7 other unresolved missing persons cases. All children. All between 1982 and 1986. Each one from a different county, each one supposedly random, but each one spatially connected to the Whitaker epicenter like spokes on a wheel converging on a hole no one could see. To Arcau she dug further, and that's when she found something that hadn't been discovered in the original investigation. At least, not reported. Sarah's toy keyboard, when cleaned and powered by a custom lithium cell, began to emit a low-frequency pulse, too soft for human ears, but visible as interference on nearby electronics. Her radio, her old landline, her hearing aid. They all buzzed in unison for 7 seconds and then fell silent. And then came the voice, faint, distorted, like signal through water it was never supposed to open. But you heard us, didn't you? You still remember. The transmission repeated every 13 minutes. Never more, never less. And with each repetition, her software logged a slight shift in waveform, as if the message was trying to correct itself, clarify something. On the 9th loop, the signal resolved. It whispered a single phrase. Sarah is not the youngest anymore. Then Louisa didn't sleep that night. She wrote a full incident report, encrypted it, uploaded it to 4 dead drop servers across the globe, left a paper trail to a contact in Toronto. Then she disappeared. Her cabin was found 3 days later, burned to the ground. No body, no remains. Just a melted circuit board on the edge of the woods, half buried, still warm to the touch. And a phrase carved into the bark of a tree nearby echoes will always try to reassemble. The Sarah Whitaker toy keyboard was never recovered. But digital copies of Louisa's analysis began to circulate in fringe research forums, and one user under the name Obverse3 claimed to have recreated the circuit using a 3D bioprinter. When asked what happened after he activated it, he only replied with, "The house showed up in my dreams again. Only this time I wasn't outside. It surfaced in the most ordinary way, not in a top-secret facility, not in a classified archive, but inside a shoebox at a community estate sale in Deer Lodge, Montana. An old woman had passed away. No next of kin. Her belongings boxed and priced. Among them, a plain cardboard container filled with photographs from the 1980s, Polaroids negatives, a few envelopes from long-defunct photo labs. It sat on a folding table between costume jewelry and kitchen timers ignored by most, until a college student majoring in photography bought the box for $5, thinking it might hold something aesthetically weird. She didn't realize what she had until weeks later when she noticed a familiar face staring back at her from one of the Polaroids. 2 children. A girl around 14 with a sketchbook in her lap. A boy, maybe 9, mid-laugh face partially obscured by motion blur. The Whitaker kids, seated together on what looked like a wooden bench in a forest clearing. Neither seemed frightened, but neither looked into the lens. And behind them, just to the left, a third presence. An adult figure, standing partially in shadow, tall, barefoot, wearing clothes that didn't fit the era, what looked like a tunic gray, loose with visible seams across the arms. But it was the face that disturbed everyone who saw it, or more precisely, the absence of one. No matter how the image was scanned, enlarged, sharpened, AI upscaled, or infrared filtered, the face remained smudged, like it had been rubbed away from memory itself. Not pixelated, not covered, just unstuck. As if the camera had captured a thing not meant to be perceived in still form. The student posted the photo online. It spread slowly at first, mostly among paranormal message boards and niche cold case blogs. But then, someone did a metadata analysis of the original scan, and something impossible came back, time-stamped November 2nd, 1991, 7 years after the Whitakers vanished. That date wasn't just random. It was the exact day that Marie Whitaker's sister, who had never spoken to press and had long distanced herself from the case, was admitted to a psychiatric facility outside Cheyenne. According to medical records, she had entered the hospital in a dissociative state. Claimed she'd seen Marie and the kids at 2:14 a.m., standing at the foot of her bed, silently watching her. She said they were soaking wet. Not from rain, from something else. The phrase she repeated again and again in the intake report, "They're not in the ground. They're in the seam." At the time, the statement was dismissed as a grief-fueled hallucination. But now, with the photo, the timing couldn't be ignored. The type of the Polaroid was submitted to an independent imaging lab in Vancouver. 3 senior analysts signed off on the same conclusion. The film stock matched a batch manufactured between late 1990 and early 1992. The camera model left a characteristic pressure pattern on the film, a rare discontinued variant of the Polaroid spectra. The chemical signature of the photo paper, aged exactly 34 years by isotopic decay, confirming it had not been faked or artificially aged. The photo was real, captured on real film printed in real time, meaning someone in 1991 had taken a photo of two missing children 7 years after they vanished alive, seemingly well-fed, dressed in clothes with no visible brand or origin. And beside them stood someone or something that refused to resolve into any known human shape. The most terrifying detail was discovered by accident. A lighting technician studying contrast values on the photo noticed a barely visible edge behind the tall figure. He enhanced it. It was a door frame. Faded. Wooden. With a pattern above the lintel, tiny carved stars arranged in a spiral identical to a symbol found carved into the underside of Sarah's toy keyboard circuit. But the door was standing on its own, no walls. Just a freestanding threshold in the middle of the woods. A door to nowhere. Or maybe to somewhere no one was meant to follow. After the analysis, the Polaroid was moved to a private collection, reportedly acquired by a retired intelligence officer with deep ties to early M-Cultura research. He has refused all requests for interviews. But one leaked voicemail from his phone contained only a single sentence. They're not time travelers. They're residue. There is a word that kept appearing in redacted reports, old Air Force memos, declassified defense experiments, and even scribbled in the margins of a 1983 psychology dissertation funded by DARPA SEAM. Not in the textile sense, not in geology either, but as a dimensional concept. A seam was described vaguely and always indirectly as a narrow interstice between resolute states. Between what we see and what we overlook. Between occupied space and misremembered absence. One memo dated July 1982, titled Cognitive Harmonics and Spatial Instability in Domestic Test Fields, outlined the concern subjects exposed to certain spatially recurring geometries begin experiencing delay perception, recurring echoes in motion, and presence anomalies. In 8 of 10 trials, individuals report something being there that used to be not. We believe this is related to early-stage seam interaction. The report was signed off not by a physicist, but by a linguist. Dr. Howard Lim, a specialist in semiotic decay. He had worked on early Cold War interrogation algorithms. He later disappeared from public life. But in 2001, a box of his handwritten notes surfaced in a bankruptcy storage auction in Wyoming. Among them was a single cassette tape labeled Whitaker Field Notes. June 8th. The audio begins with static, then footsteps, a woman's voice. There's no echo here. Even when I clap, the sound goes nowhere, like it falls into fabric. A male voice responds, describe what you see. It's the kitchen again. Same table, same chair. But there's no food, no clock, just drawings. Everywhere. Child's drawings, all of them of the same room. Then she says something chilling. I can see the me that was already here. And then silence. No scream, no static, just the tape ending. The linguists reviewing the tape noted something strange. The woman's voice begins to subtly detune from reality. By the 4th sentence, her inflection drifts just enough to register as off, like an uncanny mimic. By the final sentence, I can see the me that was already here. The audio waveform splits ever so slightly, as though 2 versions of her were speaking in sync, but one was half a word behind. This matched a discovery from an entirely different field. In 2022, a team at MIT's Department of Spatial Computing published an obscure study about recursive architecture in childhood memory recall. They found that when people were asked to reconstruct their childhood home from memory, a statistically significant number included rooms that never existed, rooms with impossible geometry, unreachable corners, or windows that faced nowhere. They called these phantom spaces seam rooms. because no one remembered entering them, only realizing they'd always been there. One researcher, Dr. Amanda Keller, cross-referenced the study with known cold case disappearances involving children under 10. She discovered something staggering. Out of 420 cases between 1975 and 1990, at least 184 involved children who spoke repeatedly about rooms that did not exist before their disappearance. Drawings, diary entries, verbal descriptions, all referencing doors, closets, crawl spaces that parents insisted had never been part of the house. In one case, unrelated to the Whitakers, a 7-year-old boy named Elliot described a room behind the refrigerator, accessed by turning off your voice. He vanished a week later. The house was later gutted. Behind the fridge, only drywall. But embedded in the insulation was a single photograph, a hallway with no ceiling. And on the back, scribbled in graphite, "This is the place between mom and not mom." And by the time the seam theory was given a name, it was already too late to contain. The houses had been demolished, the witnesses dead, the evidence fragmented, scattered, buried. But the idea had escaped. The theory now lives in forums, archives, basements, whispers. In the notebooks of grad students, the margins of physics dissertations, the subtext of fictional horror that feels a little too accurate. And the Whitakers. They are no longer spoken of as victims, but as anchors. People who stepped wrong not in time, but in placement. Who became embedded in the seam between visibility and absence. In 2005, a private researcher funded a deep radar scan of the original Whitaker lot. Beneath the concrete, still nothing. No cavity, no anomaly, no passage. But for one brief moment during the scan, every frequency returned the same false positive, a heartbeat. 3 of them. It began with a diary entry from 1991. A 12-year-old girl named Kelsey Hargrove, living in Oregon, wrote, "Had the dream again. Same White House on a hill. Same swing set that creaks even when there's no wind. But this time I made it inside. There was a hallway that smelled like crayons and bleach. At the end, a red door with a name scratched into it. I touched the doorknob. Cold, so cold it burned. The name on the door was Sarah. Her mother thought little of it. Kids dream strange things. But when Kelsey disappeared 6 months later on a calm spring afternoon while walking home from school, the dream took on a different weight. She was never found. But 3 years later, her journal resurfaced, under the floorboards of a house 600 miles away. The family who lived there had never met the Hargroves, had never been to Oregon. But the journal had Kelsey's name, her drawings, her careful handwriting, and the final entry read, "There's another girl behind the red door. I think she's me." And fast forward 2 decades, 2013. A university researcher in Vermont, Dr. Lee Danvers, was conducting a longitudinal sleep study on dream repetition in adolescence. Over 10 years, she collected more than 9,000 dream logs. Out of those 143 logs, across 57 different participants, described a White House on a hill, a swing that moved on its own, and a red door with a name. In 12 separate cases, the name was Sarah. In 4 others, it was Jenna. The names rotated, but the structure stayed the same. The house appeared half-formed, different in each account. Sometimes Gothic, sometimes mid-century, but always white, always distant, always watching. One dreamer wrote, "I'm not entering the house. The house is entering me." Another, "I didn't dream it. I remembered it." The Dr. Danvers became obsessed. She built a database, the Recursion Project, cross-referencing the dreams with public disappearance cases between 1980 and 2010. She found 32 matches. victims who vanished with no trace but had once described dreams of the same house. Some had even drawn it, and when their drawings were superimposed, layer over layer, a pattern emerged. The architecture changed, but the door remained. Red, peeling paint, a brass knob, a name scrawled with something that wasn't ink. Sometimes Sarah, sometimes Jenna, sometimes Alan, the Whitaker names. And then came the breakthrough, not from a scientist, but from a man named Raymond Ness, a former HVAC repairman from Missouri. In 2006, he suffered a stroke. During recovery, he began painting obsessively. His family said he never painted before the stroke. But after he painted only one thing in the same house over and over, always white, always alone, always with a red door. In one of the paintings, one he called The Last Dream Before Waking, and there was a figure in the window. A young girl, black hair, sketchbook in hand. When investigators later showed him a photo of Jenna Whitaker, age 14, taken just weeks before she vanished, Raymond froze, then said softly, "She was the one inside. She didn't want me to wake up." He died 2 weeks later in his sleep. The last thing he wrote in paint, not ink, was on the floor of his studio. She lives in the walls of the place that remembers. Numb the Whitaker house. It seems is not a structure made of wood or memory. It's something else. A recursive construct. It builds itself inside minds sensitive to pattern intrusion. Dreamers, children, people who survive trauma or near-death experiences. Each version is slightly different. But the outcome is always the same, a room that should not be there, a name on a red door, and the sense that someone or something is watching from behind it. In 2024, an AI researcher working on dream pattern mapping at Stanford unknowingly recreated the house using data extracted from anonymized brain scan visuals. It wasn't an artistic rendering. It was a 3D architectural plan. When they ran it through a simulation, something strange happened. Every virtual camera placed in the house malfunctioned when aimed at the hallway where the red door would be. Logs show the system returning a persistent anomaly code error spatial loop unresolved. In layman's terms, the house could not complete itself in a measurable space because it wasn't built there. It was built between dreams and waking, between trauma and forgetting, between those who vanished and those who almost did. And the red door, maybe it's not meant to be opened. Maybe it's already open. It was early September 1984, 3 months after the Whitaker family vanished, when an amateur radio operator in South Dakota named Walter Kincaid reported something strange. Walter had been a hobbyist ham radio enthusiast since the late 1950s. He operated an old Yaesu FT101 transceiver from a shed behind his house, mostly chatting with truckers or other hobbyists along Highway 12. Most nights were uneventful. Some static, some boredom, the occasional drunk trucker telling war stories into the void. But that night, September 3rd, 1984, he caught something he couldn't explain. It was a voice transmission on Channel 14, unscheduled, weak, garbled, but distinct. It began with a low hiss, then a girl's voice, thin, cracking like it had traveled too far too fast. "Think I'm still here." Static. The hallway keeps changing. I write on the walls, but it doesn't stay. More static. Then a pause. Is it still 1984? Walter recorded it, like he did everything, on an old magnetic cassette. He brought the tape to the county sheriff the next day. But no one took him seriously. They said it was interference, probably CB bleed over or a prank. Maybe some kid messing around with a voice scrambler. The case file was stamped with 2 words, "No credible origin." For 30 years, the tape sat in a cardboard box in Walter's garage. Forgotten. Until a local podcast producer, Kayla Morning, interviewed Walter in 2016 for a segment on unsolved frequencies of the American West. Kayla borrowed the tape, digitized it, ran it through modern audio software, and what she found stopped her cold. The voice hadn't been distorted. It had been looped imperfectly. On careful inspection, the same set of phrases occurred every 9 minutes and 12 seconds. The timing was slightly off each time. Glitches, warps, like a record scratched, but never quite skipping in the same place. Each loop revealed something new, faint background details emerging between the static. A door closing, a child's cough, a man whispering in a language no one recognized. In loop 3, the voice said, "They're frozen, still eating. They don't know they're stuck." In loop 5, "If anyone's listening, I think we were in the photo, the one on the mantel." Loop 9, "The house remembers more than we do." And loop 12, perhaps the most chilling, "You think you're hearing me now, but I've already said this. You're just catching up." Kayla sent the recording to audio forensics experts, including a linguist at Columbia and a sound engineer at Caltech. The consensus: the frequency distortion was not natural. More importantly, when the audio was cross-analyzed against public databases of missing persons' known voice samples, one hit returned a 92% confidence match: Jenna Whitaker, age 14. Recorded reading aloud in a school project in 1983. The revelation set off a storm of theories online. Some believed Jenna had been trying to transmit from inside a temporal loop, her voice breaking through as the pattern repeated. Others believed the signal originated from a physical place, perhaps a buried room sealed behind time or memory, emitting a decaying frequency like a black box lost in the static of consciousness. The most unnerving theory that the Whitaker house didn't just trap people. It recorded them. Each memory, each word, each failed attempt to leave. And like a dying cassette tape, it plays those fragments back into the world, hoping someone somewhere will listen. In 2018, Kayla released the episode. She titled it "The House That Broadcast Back." Within days, it was downloaded over 2 million times. But shortly after the original tape, the one Walter recorded in 1984, went missing from her home. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage, no footprints. Only a piece of magnetic tape, unspooled, laid in a perfect spiral across her kitchen floor. And written in faded red Sharpie on the back of a grocery receipt, "There are more voices still inside." October 5th, 2023. An unmarked padded envelope arrived at the Front Ridge Public Library, a rural branch in northern Missouri nearly 600 miles from where the Whitaker family vanished in 1984. There was no return address, no postage date, only a handwritten label in faded blue ink to the quiet place. Inside the envelope was a single item, a sketchbook, water damaged, frayed at the spine. The cover was soft leather, stitched by hand with a single name etched across the bottom corner: Jenna. At first glance, it looked like a typical teenage journal from the 1980s. Doodles, pencil sketches, song lyrics, scribbled names of friends. But the librarian who opened it, a retired art teacher named Lisbeth Hale, noticed something impossible. One of the drawings inside depicted her face, in profile, not as she looked now, but exactly as she appeared in 1993, when she'd been a student art coordinator at a Missouri middle school. The date written beside the sketch: March 19th, 1984. 9 years before they ever could have met. As she turned the page, another drawing a floor plan. One she didn't recognize at first until she realized it was an exact blueprint of the Whitaker family's home in Illinois. not as it was found in police files, but with added rooms beneath the basement. Small details matched recovered schematics from the mysterious Room 1B. And on one page, drawn in perfect graphite shading, was a figure standing at the bottom of a spiral staircase. No face, just long outstretched arms and a head tilted too far to the side as if listening through a wall that wasn't there. Below the image in Jenna's unmistakable cursive, "She keeps walking even when there's nowhere left." Kapadarka, by the time local authorities were contacted, the sketchbook had changed. At least a dozen new pages had appeared, drawings that hadn't been there the day before. The security footage from the library's locked archival room showed no intrusions. No one had entered or exited. And yet the images multiplied. One showed a strange, twisted tree, leafless but humming with power lines branching from its limbs. Another was a top-down map of what appeared to be an entire subterranean city beneath a cul-de-sac. Each structure was labeled in Jenna's handwriting with names like The Listen Wells, Echo Dining, Mother's Last Room, and then a portrait. Drawn in charcoal, smudged, violently sketched. It showed a boy 8 or 9 years old with his mouth sewn shut and a television where his eyes should be. The caption read, "They broadcast him for years before anyone noticed." Then of Delaware experts were brought in. Paper analysts confirmed the notebook itself dated to the early 1980s. The graphite matched pencils from a discontinued Japanese brand. But the ink used on newer pages, it contained trace elements of magnetite, the same mineral found in the walls of the Whitaker house's subchamber, which shouldn't have been possible, because the house had been demolished. Eventually, the notebook was sent to a private preservationist at a university in Indiana for further study. But during transit, it vanished. The shipment vehicle arrived. The package didn't. No one signed for it. No tracking error. No theft report. Only a final email from the preservationist, time-stamped 2 hours before the disappearance. The sketchbook is now cycling pages. It appears to be drawing something new every 12 minutes. Some of the sketches depict events that haven't happened yet. Others are watching me. Then silence. Three weeks later, one final page was emailed anonymously to Kayla Morning, the same podcast host who had aired Jenna's voice loops. The sketch was crude, almost childlike, but unmistakable. It showed the outline of the Whitaker family standing in front of their home, but each face had been erased, scrubbed out violently with black ink. Above them, written in pencil, the house draws who it wants to remember. And below, smaller, as if whispered between the lines, we didn't vanish. We were replaced. The public record ends with the Whitaker family in 1984. But in early 2024, a retired city clerk in Bell Hollow, the neighboring township, submitted an anonymous tip to a local archivist forum, a forum used mostly by librarian surveyors and retired civil engineers. Her message was short. There was another family at 119 Cypress. We didn't file them. We were told not to. She included a scanned copy of a work memo from 1987. It was faint, printed on dot matrix paper, signed only with the initials CRH, Do Not Process Utilities for Residents, under name Wendell. File as temp until further update. Effective June 13th. No further records exist. The Wendell family never appeared on tax rolls. They never registered for school. There are no medical records, no phone listings, no voter registrations. And yet, in a box of discarded township directories from the late 80s, one line stands out: Wendell C. Cypress Lane. Unverified. No first name. No spouse. Just a note in red ink, now smeared. They keep curtains shut. One child walks at night. By 1992, even that entry vanished. City logs show the address marked as vacant. But aerial photos tell a different story. A newly surfaced set of satellite images from 1989 to 1991, archived by the USDA for foliage density studies, clearly show laundry lines outside the Whitaker home. Parked vehicles that change positions. At one point, a trampoline appears behind the house, then disappears 2 months later. Someone lived there. Someone not counted. In early 2025, a researcher named Nina Holloway, investigating the Wendell anomaly, filed a FOIA request to review the Bell Hollow census drafts. Her request was denied despite the documents being over 30 years old. Instead, she received a single manila envelope in the mail 2 weeks later. Inside was a Polaroid photo dated 1988. It showed 4 people standing in front of the Whitaker home. Their faces were overexposed, blown out by light or deliberately smudged before developing. But their shadows were clear. 4 distinct forms. A tall male, a woman with long hair, a child barefoot, and a 4th shape wider, hunched, standing slightly behind the others. Not a person, not quite. Something about the proportions was wrong. The caption on the back read, "C. Wendell Sarah little m, and guest." Nina Holloway vanished the day after she posted the photo online. Her apartment was left undisturbed, her computer still running, but every single file related to the Wendell case had been wiped, including backups stored offline. Her last message posted to a secure research group just before her disappearance. The Wendells weren't a family. They were holding place for one. A month later, a strange thing happened in a nearby DMV. An elderly woman came in to renew her license. She gave her name as Miriam Wendell. When asked for ID, she said she didn't have one, never needed one. When asked for proof of residence, she handed the clerk a folded receipt from 1990. A dry cleaning slip. The clerk scanned it anyway. And the system responded with a prompt, "Welcome, temporary resident. Your cycle ends soon." Before anyone could ask what it meant, the woman collapsed. By the time paramedics arrived, she was gone. No heartbeat, no temperature. Only one note was found folded inside her coat pocket. They needed new names to forget the old ones, so they borrowed ours. I'll net the Wendell line ends there. No trace of the family exists today, not in Bell Hollow, not in the census, not even in private real estate databases. But when asked if she remembered them, one former neighbor replied, "There was someone there. I just don't remember if they were real before the house noticed them, or if it made them to hide something else." April 12th, 2025. A small drone pilot from Iowa documenting forgotten neighborhoods for a visual art project titled "America Left On" uploads footage of the former Whitaker residence on Cypress Lane. The drone, a basic quadcopter with no AI enhancements, was meant to capture 3 minutes of static overhead footage, no filters, no tracking. But what it recorded sparked the largest burst of public interest the case had seen in nearly a decade. Because, when played back, the footage revealed something impossible. A moving shadow. Not a tree, not a bird. A tall, thin silhouette gliding across the driveway of the former Whitaker property. And what made it even more disturbing, it repeated. Not just once. Not even twice. Every day, at the exact same timestamp, 4:17:39 p.m. The same unbroken silhouette drifted across the same 10-foot stretch of sidewalk. The light didn't change. The angle didn't shift. Even the leaves fluttered the same way in the background, as if the footage were caught in a permanent loop. Skeptics immediately claimed it was a file error. Compression glitch, bad rendering. But additional drone pilots from across the country were drawn to the location, eager to verify or debunk. The result, every drone, regardless of model or software, captured the same repeating shadow. And only at that house. Not a single other address on Cypress Lane displayed the same anomaly. Some viewers reported hearing faint, overlapping voices when enhancing the audio track murmurs layered into the ambient noise. Phrases like, "She didn't go back in." "Mark the hour, reset the skin." "Stay out of room 1B. Others heard nothing. But researchers at the University of Chicago ran spectral and frame analysis. Their conclusion: the loop was real, not a playback error, not faked footage. Some theorized it wasn't a replay of the past, but a scheduled reenactment, a haunting built not from memory, but from something programmed into the house itself. As if whatever had taken root there after the Whitakers was trying to remember something it didn't quite understand. One researcher, Dr. Esteban Hollow, submitted a theory that quickly drew national attention. He proposed the drone shadow was not the memory of a person, but the shell of a decision. A shadow not cast by light, but by a choice that could never be undone. A local boy just 15 years old offered a simpler explanation in a video that went viral. He said, "Maybe it's not a ghost. Maybe it's just someone still trying to leave, but they never finished leaving." The city erected barriers around the site after a small surge of visitors disrupted traffic and broke into nearby vacant properties. But the footage didn't stop. Dozens of drones kept capturing the shadow. And one night in late May, something changed. For the first time since recordings began, the shadow looked up, only for a frame, barely noticeable unless slowed to 1% speed, but unmistakable. The silhouette paused, and its head tilted skyward toward the hovering drone as if it knew it was being watched. Then the timestamp flickered, just for a moment. And when the next day's footage came in, the shadow was gone. For one full week, no trace of the repeating figure appeared, until it showed up again. Not on Cypress Lane, but 14 miles away in the backyard of a vacant elementary school. Same time, same movement, same silence. And beneath the shadow carved into the dirt, she left the door open. Now we all remember. It started with a test. A digital humanities lab at Stanford, in collaboration with a forensic reconstruction team, began mapping old suburban photo archives to detect spatial anomalies. Things like door placements, window measurements, landscaping inconsistencies. The idea was simple: scan thousands of family photographs, apply geometric analysis, and compare structures against original blueprints. Their test case, a small, relatively contained neighborhood called Cypress Lane, selected at random from a 1980s suburban housing database. But 11 days into the scan, one of the PhD students noticed something strange. At 119 Cypress, the former Whitaker home, a door appeared in 5 photographs that shouldn't have been possible. A door that did not exist in any blueprint, code enforcement record, or contractor plan from the time. The photos, captured between 1983 and 1984, showed a narrow black door set between the kitchen and back laundry hallway. But the Whitakers' house only had one back door. No utility entrance. No crawlspace panel. The strange doorway was only visible when a family member was near it, never when the space was photographed empty. And when reverse lighting and X-ray overlays were applied, the outline of the doorway remained embedded in the wall structure, as if the house itself had a memory of being opened. By week 3, the team had uncovered 7 homes along Cypress, with similar impossible doors, all only visible in certain moments. A father turning away mid-sentence. A girl standing alone after a family birthday. A brother walking back inside from a fight on the front lawn. Each door appeared only once. Each time the photo timestamp was between 200 a.m. and 2:17 a.m., always in the margins, never in focus. And when brightness was inverted, a faint handprint became visible near the threshold. Bark, the Stanford lab, attempted to remap the blueprints, digitally stripping out all human subjects and seeing if the door could be geometrically projected. When they tried this with 1919 Cypress, the resulting spatial model showed something horrifying. There was a void between the kitchen and the hallway, a cavity exactly the height and width of a narrow door, but filled in with poured concrete. Someone had sealed it from within the framing of the house. And the sealant, when compared with 1980s materials, didn't match anything on record. It was as if the house had grown the wall itself. A week later, a 1985 photo surfaced. Not of the Whitakers, but of the Klein's family who lived 2 doors down. Their youngest son, Thomas, went missing on May 3, 1984, declared a runaway. In the photo, Thomas stands barefoot near the back fence. Behind him, that same narrow door, ajar, and inside, through the crack, a face. Not his own, not any member of the Klein's family. A thin, pale face with no visible eyes, only shadows where the eyes should have been. The authorities reopened the case for a day, just one. But no further forensic investigation was permitted on Cypress Lane, not since a city ordinance quietly declared the land a psychological hazard site due to residual trauma impact. They boarded the homes, erased them from the property register. Cypress Lane as a residential area no longer existed, and the drone footage, it still appears, once a week captured and uploaded by anonymous users to archival threads and lost media forums. Always at 4:17:39 p.m. The shadow returns, but it no longer walks. It stands still, facing the place where the door once was. And beneath the image in comments, someone always writes the same line. We never heard it open. We only heard it close.